The salt-tinged breeze from Puget Sound caressed my face as I watched Vanessa's perfect facade crumble right before my eyes. 7 years of calculated smiles and performative concern dissolved into shock as she stared at the certified letter in her trembling hands. The luxury waterfront condo she'd convinced my father to buy, the one she thought would be hers forever, now had 30 days to be vacated. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ferry horn in the distance. "Richard promised me." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I savored the moment, letting the satisfaction wash over me like the tide outside her floor-to-ceiling windows. "Did he promise you in writing, Vanessa? Because the lighthouse property he left me came with very specific instructions and very binding legal power." Her eyes darted up, mascara already beginning to smudge from gathering tears. "What lighthouse?" "Richard never owned a lighthouse." That's when I smiled, 7 years of patience finally bearing fruit. "There's a lot my father owned that you never knew about." I was 19 when my mother, Catherine, lost her battle with the autoimmune disease that had gradually claimed her mobility, her independence, and finally her life. Dad and I were adrift in our grief, two sailors who'd lost their compass in the storm. Our craftsman-style home in Queen Anne, once filled with Mom's laughter and botanical illustrations, fell silent except for the echo of our footsteps across the hardwood floors. Dad threw himself into his work at the software company he'd built, from the ground up during Seattle's tech boom. I channeled my grief into my marine biology studies, spending more time in the university labs than at home. We were healing, slowly, in our own disconnected ways. That's when Vanessa entered the key picture. She'd been hired as the new head of marketing at Dad's company, all sleek blazers and strategic compliments. I first met her at the company holiday party, 6 months after Mom's passing. Something about the way she touched Dad's arm when she laughed, the calculated warmth in her eyes when she spoke about Mom's beautiful legacy, set off warning bells in my head. "Your father speaks so highly of you, Emily," she said, her voice honeyed with practiced sincerity. Catherine must have been extraordinary to have raised such an accomplished daughter. It was the perfect thing to say, acknowledging Mom while subtly establishing herself as someone who understood our loss. I watched Dad's shoulders relax at the mention of Mom's name, something most people awkwardly avoided. "Emily's planning to specialize in marine conservation," Dad said, pride momentarily breaking through his grief. Catherine always said the ocean was in her blood. Vanessa's smile never faltered, but something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation, recalibration. That's wonderful. The Wilson women seem to have a passion for preservation. 3 months. Later, I came home from university to find Vanessa cooking dinner in our kitchen, Mom's kitchen, wearing Mom's apron. "Emily, perfect timing," she beamed, stirring something that smelled nothing like Mom's recipes. "I hope you're hungry. Your father's just freshening up." I stood frozen in the doorway, watching her move confidently through the space that had been my mother's domain. She'd already rearranged the spice rack, replacing Mom's intuitive system with alphabetical order. "I didn't realize you'd be here," I managed, setting down my backpack. "Oh, your father didn't mention? I've been coming over to cook a few nights a week. He's been living on takeout since." She trailed off, her expression shifting to one of practiced compassion. "Well, I just thought he could use some home-cooked meals." When Dad appeared, his face looked more relaxed than I'd seen in months. He kissed Vanessa's cheek with a familiarity that made my stomach lurch. "Emily, did Vanessa tell you she's making her famous risotto? It's incredible. You're going to love it." That night, as we ate at the dining table that still held the water ring from where Mom had once placed a vase too wet from the garden, I saw the first glimpse of Vanessa's strategy. She wasn't just cooking dinner, she was creating a new normal, one where she was essential to Dad's happiness. "I've been thinking," Dad said as Vanessa served coffee in mugs I'd never seen before. Maybe it's time to do some redecorating. A fresh start might do us all good. The way he glanced at Vanessa told me this wasn't his idea. What a lovely thought. Richard, she said, touching his hand. Though we should preserve some special touches, Catherine had beautiful taste. I felt sick, watching her position herself as the reasonable one, the preserver of Mom's memory, while simultaneously suggesting, it's erasure. Mom loved this house exactly as it is, I said, hating how young and petulant I sounded. Dad's face clouded. Emmy, it's been almost a year. We can't live in a museum. I understand completely, Emily, Vanessa interjected, her voice dripping with sympathy. Change is so difficult, especially after loss. We'll go slowly, I promise. She had outmaneuvered me in a single exchange, making me appear resistant to Dad's healing while positioning herself as understanding of both perspectives. That night, I called my Uncle Henry, Mom's older brother, and the only one who might understand my unease. I don't like her, I said plainly, staring out my bedroom window at the Seattle skyline. That's natural, kiddo, Uncle Henry replied, his voice crackling through the speaker. No one would measure up to Katie. It's not that, I insisted. There's something calculated about her. The way she talks about Mom like she knew her, how she's already rearranging things. Uncle Henry was quiet for a moment. Your mother was always good at reading people. Said it was like seeing currents in the water. The surface might look calm, but she could sense what was moving underneath. Mom would have seen right through Vanessa, I whispered. Then use what Katie taught. You, he said simply. Watch the currents. That conversation became the foundation of everything that followed. While Vanessa thought I was just a grieving daughter struggling with her father's new relationship, I began to observe and document every subtle current beneath her perfectly composed surface. Within 6 months, Vanessa had moved into our home. Within 8, she'd convinced Dad to propose. By the 1-year anniversary of Mom's death, she was my stepmother, and the house had begun its transformation. Mom's botanical illustrations were relocated to the guest room, replaced by abstract art Vanessa said would appreciate in value. The garden Mom had tended was redesigned by a landscaper who specialized in low-maintenance elegance. Each change was presented as practical, forward-thinking, or financially sound. Each objection I raised was gently countered with concern about my difficulty moving forward. Richard, I'm worried about Emily, I overheard her saying one night. She seems to be using her studies to avoid dealing with her grief. All those long hours at the lab, the weekends at Uncle Henry's, it's not healthy. I stood silently in the hallway, listening as my dedication to my mother's passion, the ocean she'd loved and taught me to protect, was reframed as pathological avoidance. She's always been focused on her studies, Dad defended weakly. Of course, and that's admirable. I just wonder if she's using work to avoid building new family connections. When was the last time she joined us for dinner, or accepted any of my invitations to spend time together? The invitations she mentioned were always extended when she knew I had lab commitments or study groups, conflicts she'd learned about by checking the family calendar I still updated out of habit. When Dad suggested I try harder to include Vanessa in my life, I realized her strategy was working. I was being painted as the problem, the obstacle to family harmony. That night, I changed tactics. I began accepting her invitations, rearranging my schedule to accommodate brunches and shopping trips I had no interest in. I smiled through discussions about redecorating my childhood bedroom because I hardly used it anyway, and nodded when she suggested selling Mom's piano because it takes up so much space in the living room. All the while, I was documenting everything. Conversations recorded on my phone, changes to the house photographed and dated, financial discussions noted with timestamps. Uncle Henry, who'd become my confidant and ally, advised me to be thorough but cautious. Your mother always said that patience reveals the truth. He told me during one of our weekend visits to his cabin on San Juan Island. People who are hiding something eventually get sloppy. Uncle Henry lived alone in a rustic cabin near a historic lighthouse on the island's northern point. The lighthouse had been decommissioned decades ago, but maintained as a historical site. I'd always loved visiting, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs as Uncle Henry told stories about Mom's childhood adventures exploring the rocky shores. What Vanessa didn't know, what even I didn't fully understand at the time, was that these weekends weren't just escapes from her influence. They were my education. Uncle Henry had been a financial advisor before retirement, specializing in estate planning for tech executives exactly like my father. During those long weekends, between hikes along the shore and quiet dinners watching the sunset, he taught me about trusts, codicils, inheritance law, and the importance of documentation. Knowledge is the best defense against manipulation, he'd say, poring over legal documents spread across his weathered dining table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And timing is everything. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Vanessa was orchestrating her own education campaign. 2 years into her marriage with Dad, she began introducing him to investment opportunities through her friend Craig Donaldson, a financial advisor with slick presentations and flashy projections. Richard, Craig's startup portfolio has outperformed the market 3 years running, she'd say over dinner. He's offered to look at our investments, see if we can optimize them better. Dad, whose technical brilliance had always been balanced by a certain naivete about people's motivations, was receptive. Could be worth exploring. What do you think, Emmy? Before I could voice my concerns, Vanessa would smoothly interject, "Sweetheart, Emily's expertise is marine biology, not finance. I just want to make sure we're maximizing your hard work for all our futures." The "our futures" part was particularly effective. It positioned her suggestions as family-oriented rather than self-interested. Within 6 months, Dad had moved significant portions of his portfolio into investments recommended by Craig. Within a year, they were discussing liquidating some of his long-held company stock to fund a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in a tech startup promising revolutionary advances in virtual reality. The returns could set us up for generations, Vanessa enthused, her eyes gleaming with something that looked nothing like family security. I voiced my concerns to Dad privately, suggesting he consult with his longtime financial advisor before making any major changes. "Vanessa's just trying to help," he said, his voice taking on the defensive tone that had become common whenever I questioned her suggestions. Craig's track record speaks for itself. What Dad didn't see, what Vanessa never suspected I'd discovered, was Craig's connection to 3 failed startups in the past decade, each following the same pattern: hype, investment, mysterious market challenges, and ultimately, dissolution with executives like Craig walking away with hefty consulting fees, while investors lost everything. I shared this information with Uncle Henry, who helped me compile a detailed dossier on Craig's history. "Not yet," he advised when I wanted to show it to Dad immediately. "Timing is everything, remember? If you move too soon, Vanessa will just paint you as jealous or resistant to change." So I waited, documenting each new opportunity, each subtle manipulation as Vanessa gradually isolated Dad from his old friends and colleagues, positioning herself and Craig as his primary advisors on all things financial. The most alarming development came 3 years into their marriage, when Vanessa suggested selling our family home in Queen Anne. "Real estate in this area has peaked," she explained over dinner. "If we sell now and move downtown, we could use the difference to significantly increase our investment with Craig's new fund." Dad looked uncertain for the first time. "This house has been in the family since Emily was born. I'm not sure." Vanessa reached for his hand, her expression softening into practiced concern. "Richard, I know how much this house means to you, to both of you. She glanced at me with perfect sympathy. But Catherine wouldn't want you trapped in the past. She'd want you to make smart decisions for your future, for Emily's future. Invoking Mom's name was her masterstroke. Dad looked at her photo on the mantel, one of the few that remained in the main living space, and nodded slowly. You're right. Katie always said sentimentality was the enemy of growth. I nearly choked on my water. Mom had never said anything remotely like that. She'd treasured this house, its history, the marks on the doorframe tracking my height through the, years. Before I could object, Vanessa continued. Besides, Emily hardly stays here anymore. Between her research and those weekends with Henry, this place is too big for just us. Within 2 months, our family home was on the market. Within 4, we'd moved into a sleek waterfront condo in downtown Seattle with floor-to-ceiling windows and none of our history. Mom's remaining belongings were relegated to storage, or in many cases, donated because there simply isn't room, and Catherine would want them used rather than stored. I moved into a small apartment near the university, taking what mementos. Of Mom I could salvage. The distance made it harder to monitor Vanessa's influence, but by then she'd grown confident in her control. She became less careful, more overt in her manipulations. That overconfidence proved to be her first mistake. Dad's health began to decline in the 5th year of their marriage. At first, it was subtle. Fatigue, occasional confusion, difficulty, concentrating. When he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 58, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Vanessa positioned herself as the devoted caretaker, managing Dad's medication, accompanying him to doctor's appointments, and gradually taking over his financial affairs to reduce his stress. On the surface, she was the perfect, supportive wife. What she didn't realize was that I'd already consulted with Uncle Henry and begun the process of documenting Dad's mental capacity. We'd recorded conversations where he was lucid and specific about his wishes, particularly regarding his estate. "I want to make sure you're taken care of, Emmy," he said during one such recorded conversation at Uncle Henry's cabin, where we'd brought him for a weekend to enjoy the ocean air. "The company shares are your legacy. Your mother and I built that life for you." Uncle Henry had helped arrange for a lawyer, Marcus Donovan, an old colleague, to update Dad's will during a period of clear lucidity, specifically outlining his wishes regarding the company shares and remaining assets. Vanessa, meanwhile, was working with her own lawyer to establish herself as Dad's legal guardian, which would give her complete control over his affairs. She began excluding me from medical discussions, scheduling appointments when she knew I'd be at the research station, and subtly suggesting to Dad's doctors that my academic focus meant I wasn't involved enough to make healthcare decisions. "Emily is so devoted to her research," she'd say, her voice warm with fake pride. "Richard and I wouldn't dream of burdening her with all these medical details when she's doing such important work." By the time Dad moved into a memory care facility, 2 years later, Vanessa had successfully positioned herself as the primary decision-maker in his life. She controlled his finances, managed his medical care, and had convinced many of his remaining friends that I was too absorbed in my career to be properly involved. What she didn't know was that Uncle Henry and I had been building our case methodically, gathering evidence of every financial decision, every medical choice made without proper consultation, every manipulative conversation we could document. And she certainly didn't know about the lighthouse. The historic lighthouse property on San Juan Island, adjacent to Uncle Henry's cabin, had been purchased by my parents years before I was born. Mom had loved its wildness, its connection to the sea she studied. When she became ill, she and Dad had established a special trust for the property, with Uncle Henry as trustee until my 30th birthday. The lighthouse property wasn't just sentimentally valuable, it was worth millions. The land alone, waterfront property on an increasingly exclusive island, had quadrupled in value since their purchase. More importantly, the trust established for the lighthouse contained a critical codicil, a legal amendment that would prove to be Vanessa's undoing. When Dad passed away just before my 28th birthday, Vanessa moved quickly. Within weeks, she presented a will, allegedly updated during Dad's illness, that left everything to her, with a small trust established for my educational expenses. The document portrayed Dad as concerned about my financial responsibility and worried that I would squander the family legacy. Anyone who truly knew my father would have recognized these as absurd characterizations. I had followed in Mom's scientific footsteps, dedicated my career to ocean conservation, and lived modestly while building a respected research portfolio. Dad had always been immensely proud of my work, but Vanessa was counting on the testimony of Craig Donaldson and her circle of new friends who would corroborate her claims about Dad's concerns. She was also counting on the significant financial advantage she now controlled to outlawyer me if I contested the will. What she wasn't counting on was the hidden codicil in the Lighthouse Trust. Mom and Dad, perhaps sensing something that neither could articulate, had included a provision that would be triggered if Dad died, and his final valid will excluded me from my inheritance of the family company shares. In that case, the Lighthouse Trust would immediately gain control of a previously undisclosed insurance policy worth twice the value of those shares. Furthermore, the trust contained irrefutable documentation of Dad's true wishes, including video recordings of him explicitly stating that the company shares were my birthright and never to be sold or transferred outside the family. 2 months. After Dad's funeral, as Vanessa was preparing to liquidate his remaining company shares and complete her takeover of our family legacy, Uncle Henry and Marcus Donovan activated the Codicil. Which brings us back to that perfect moment in her waterfront condo, watching her face crumple as she read the certified letter explaining that not only was she about to lose the condo she'd manipulated Dad into buying, but every investment made through Craig Donaldson was under investigation for fraud. "You can't do this," she whispered, looking up from the papers. "Richard wanted me to have everything. He told me—" "Did he tell you about the lighthouse?" I asked quietly. Her confusion was genuine. "What lighthouse? What are you talking about?" I smiled, feeling 7 years of patience finally bearing fruit. "The property my parents bought on San Juan Island before I was born. The one that's now worth more than everything else combined. The one that holds the legal evidence of exactly what Dad wanted, and what he knew about your friend Craig." The color drained from her face. "You're lying. Richard never mentioned any lighthouse." "That's the point, Vanessa," Uncle Henry said, speaking for the first time since we'd arrived. "There were some things about Catherine and Richard that you never bothered to understand. They were always playing the long game." As Marcus explained, the legal intricacies of the codicil and the ramifications for her fraudulent will, I walked to the window and looked out at the waters of Puget Sound. Somewhere across that water was the lighthouse, Mom's lighthouse, standing sentinel just as it had for over a century, patient, watchful, enduring. The lighthouse that would now become the Catherine Wilson Marine Research Center, dedicated to the conservation of the Salish Sea ecosystems, funded by the very fortune Vanessa had schemed to control. Sometimes, the most powerful hidden treasures aren't the ones buried in secret compartments or concealed in coded messages. Sometimes they're hidden in plain sight, protected by patience, preserved by love, and revealed only when the tide finally turns. Moving in with Vanessa changed everything about our home in ways that went far beyond rearranged furniture. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like oxygen being slowly replaced with something less sustaining. Dad seemed not to notice, his relief at having someone fill the void left by Mom's passing blinding him to the calculated nature of each change. At first, Vanessa was careful to maintain the illusion of preserving Mom's memory. "We should keep Catherine's photo albums somewhere special," she'd say, voice gentle with practiced consideration. What this actually meant was removing them from the living room bookshelf to a storage box in the attic, out of sight, but technically still honored. Within 6 months of their marriage, Mom's presence had been methodically erased from our Daily lives. Her cookbooks, once splattered with evidence of culinary experiments, disappeared from the kitchen. The handmade quilts she'd created for each season were replaced with designer throws that Vanessa insisted were more contemporary. Even the distinctly Catherine-scented lavender sachets in the linen closet were discarded in favor of branded home fragrances that Vanessa claimed created a more cohesive sensory experience. Each erasure was small enough that objecting made me seem petty. "It's just a candle, Emily," Dad would say, bewildered by my attachment to such details. What he couldn't see was the pattern, the systematic removal of anything that anchored our home to its history. I learned to pick my battles. When Vanessa suggested selling Mom's vintage record collection because digital music is so much more convenient, I fought back with uncharacteristic vehemence. "Those albums are irreplaceable," I insisted, standing my ground in the living room, as Vanessa held a Joni Mitchell vinyl in manicured hands that had never placed a needle on a record. "They're not just music. They're her annotations in the margins, her favorite tracks marked with stars." Dad looked torn, the first time I'd seen him waver between Vanessa's influence and my distress. "They're taking up an entire bookcase, Richard," Vanessa pointed out, her voice reasonable. "And Emily could still enjoy the music digitally." "I'll take them to my apartment," I countered quickly. "They don't need to stay here if space is the issue." It was one of my few victories. The albums now lined my small graduate student apartment, a physical reminder of Mom that couldn't be digitized, or minimized with Vanessa's practiced efficiency. As I progressed through my marine biology program, Vanessa's methods of isolation became more sophisticated. She began planning family events that coincided precisely with my research commitments she learned about through seemingly casual conversations. "Oh, you have field research the weekend of the 15th? What a shame," she'd say, eyes wide with manufactured disappointment. "That's when we've planned the dinner with your father's investors. They were so looking forward to meeting his brilliant daughter." Dad would frown, disappointed. "Can't you reschedule your research, Emmy? These connections could be valuable for your future." What Vanessa understood, and exploited masterfully, was that marine research operated on nature's timetable, not ours. Rescheduling often meant missing critical data collection points tied to tides, migrations, or spawning cycles. My absence from family functions wasn't a choice, but a professional necessity, a nuance Dad increasingly failed to grasp under Vanessa's influence. "Emmy seems so dedicated to her work," she'd observe during my absences, voice carefully balanced between admiration and concern. "I worry sometimes that she's using it to avoid dealing with her grief, building barriers instead of bridges." These comments, delivered when I wasn't present to defend myself, gradually reshaped Dad's perception of my dedication to my career. What had once been a source of pride for him, my continuation of Mom's scientific legacy, was reframed as unhealthy avoidance. Uncle Henry became my sanctuary during this time. His cabin on San Juan Island, weathered by decades of Pacific storms, offered refuge from Vanessa's influence. The small structure sat a quarter-mile from the lighthouse, connected by a winding path through windswept grass and wildflowers that Mom had helped identify and catalog during her research visits. "Your mother loved it here because it was honest," Uncle Henry told me during one weekend visit as we walked the path toward the lighthouse. "No pretense, no manipulation, just the sea, the sky, and whatever truth they decided to tell that day." Uncle Henry had never married, dedicating himself instead to managing the wealth of others with an integrity that had earned him both respect and comfortable retirement. His cabin reflected his philosophy, simple, functional, built to last rather than impress. "Vanessa doesn't understand people like us," he said, pausing to watch a pair of eagles circling above the lighthouse. "She sees everything as a transaction, a means to acquire something else. Your mother saw the world as an ecosystem, every part connected, every action carrying consequences beyond the immediate gain. It was during these walks that Uncle Henry began my education in financial self-defense. He never called it that. The lessons were woven into conversations about family history, stories about Mom's childhood, observations about the changing island economy. But gradually, I began to understand concepts like irrevocable trusts, fiduciary responsibility, liquid versus fixed assets, and the legal frameworks that governed inheritance. "Your father built something remarkable," he said one evening as we sat on his porch watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the darkening water. "But building something is different from protecting it. Different skills entirely." I thought of Dad, brilliant at creating software architectures but notoriously trusting when it came to people. "He always sees the best in everyone," I said, quietly. Uncle Henry nodded. Richard creates, Katie protected. They balanced each other perfectly. He looked at me, his eyes, so similar to Mom's, evaluating. "You need to be both now." During these visits, I also learned the history of the lighthouse property, purchased when property on the island was still reasonably priced. Before tech wealth discovered its pristine shores, the lighthouse and surrounding 5 acres had been acquired as part of Mom's research into coastal ecosystems. "Your father wanted to surprise Katie for their 10th anniversary," Uncle Henry explained. "The lighthouse was being decommissioned, its function replaced by modern navigational systems. Richard knew Katie had been worried about development threatening the research areas here. The purchase had been more than a romantic gesture. It was a preservation effort. Mom had been conducting longitudinal studies on the island's unique tidal ecosystems, and the lighthouse property contained one of the most pristine research zones. By acquiring it, Dad had ensured her work could continue undisturbed. What I hadn't known, what Vanessa certainly didn't know, was that the lighthouse purchase had come with complicated legal arrangements reflecting Mom's practical nature and Dad's technical approach to problem solving. They created what's called a specialty purpose trust, Uncle Henry explained one rainy afternoon, spreading documents across his worn oak table, with very specific conditional triggers. The complicated legal language essentially created a fail-safe. If certain conditions occurred, control of significant family assets would transfer to the trust, bypassing normal inheritance channels. One such condition involved any attempt to alienate the company shares from family control. "Your mother insisted on this clause," Uncle Henry said. "She believed the company should always remain in Wilson hands, either Richard's or eventually yours." Back in Seattle, Vanessa's campaign to reshape Dad's financial landscape was gaining momentum. Craig Donaldson had become a regular presence. In their downtown condo, arriving with glossy presentations and promises of exclusive investment opportunities. "The beauty of private equity," Craig explained during one dinner I reluctantly attended, "is the ability to get in on innovations before the public market recognizes their value." He presented himself as a gatekeeper to financial opportunities reserved for the privileged few, positioning his exclusivity as a mark of quality rather than a red flag regarding regulatory oversight. Vanessa nodded enthusiastically, perfectly. Coiffed hair catching the light from the designer pendants she'd installed to replace Mom's vintage fixtures. Craig's last fund returned 40% in 18 months. 40%, Richard. That's more than double what your company stock did. What neither mentioned was that Craig's last fund had been a single successful investment amid numerous failures. A classic technique of highlighting wins while obscuring losses to create the illusion of consistent performance. I watched Dad considering these claims, the software engineer in him looking for patterns in the data presented. "What about risk profiles? These returns suggest significantly higher volatility than blue-chip stocks." Craig smiled. "All perfect. Teeth and practiced confidence. That's why we diversify across opportunities. Some higher risk for growth potential, some stable foundations. I've developed an algorithm that optimizes this balance based on over 20 years of market data. The word algorithm was perfectly chosen for Dad, appealing to his programmer's mind. I could almost see him processing, evaluating Craig's claims against his understanding of algorithmic efficiency. "I'd like to see the historical performance across your entire portfolio," Dad said, caution momentarily overriding Vanessa's influence. "Not just the highlighted successes." Craig's smile never faltered. "Absolutely, Richard. I'll have my team prepare a complete breakdown. In the meantime, I should mention that the opportunity I discussed earlier, the medical technology startup, has nearly reached its funding target. We've reserved a position for you, but only for another week." And there it was, the artificial scarcity tactic, creating urgency to override careful consideration. I'd seen it deployed countless times during my weekend financial education with Uncle Henry. "Classic FOMO manipulation," Uncle Henry had explained. "Create fear of missing out, and people make decisions based on emotion rather than analysis." I watched Dad's expression shift, the logical caution replaced by subtle anxiety about potentially missing an opportunity. Vanessa noticed it too, immediately reinforcing Craig's message. "Richard, remember how you hesitated on that cloud storage startup 3 years ago? The one that got acquired by Microsoft 6 months later?" She touched his arm, her voice gentle with reminder rather than accusation. "Sometimes innovation moves faster than traditional investment wisdom." The reference was carefully chosen, one of Dad's few admitted investment regrets, a missed opportunity he'd occasionally mentioned. I watched his resolve weaken under this coordinated attack on his analytical defenses. "Perhaps we could start with a smaller position," Dad suggested, compromise evident in his tone. "Test your algorithm's effectiveness before committing significant capital." Craig nodded appreciatively, as though Dad had made a particularly insightful suggestion rather than a basic risk management decision. "Wise approach, Richard. I always advise new clients to build confidence in our methods before deeper engagement." The smaller position they agreed upon that evening was $200,000, a figure that would have seemed astronomical to most people, but represented just the beginning of what Vanessa and Craig clearly viewed as accessible capital. When Dad excused himself to take a work call, I seized the rare opportunity to speak to Craig directly, without Vanessa's mediating presence. "I'd be interested in seeing the organizational structure of these investment vehicles," I said, keeping my tone casual. "The legal frameworks, governance oversight, that sort of thing?" Craig's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Certainly, though that's typically handled through our legal department. Most clients are more interested in performance metrics than administrative details." "I find the architecture of financial systems fascinating," I replied, matching his professional tone. "Especially the accountability mechanisms." Vanessa interrupted before Craig could respond, her hand suddenly on my shoulder. "Emily's academic mind at work," she laughed, the sound practiced and hollow. "Always wanting to understand systems to their core." Her fingers dug slightly into my shoulder, a warning disguised as affectionate emphasis. "Craig's time is valuable, honey. Let's not bore him with technical details when he's generously sharing his expertise over dinner." The message was clear. Questions about accountability were unwelcome. By the time Dad returned, the conversation had been safely redirected to Craig's recent heli-skiing trip to Whistler. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Vanessa walked me to the door while Dad cleared the dinner dishes. "Emily," she said, her voice lowered conspiratorially, "I know you worry about your father's investments. That's natural. You're protective, just like Catherine was." The mention of Mom, deployed as a strategic tool rather than genuine remembrance, made my skin crawl. "But you should know," she continued, adjusting a vase of perfect, scentless flowers on the entry table. "Your father's financial decisions are deeply important to his sense of control after losing your mother." questioning them in front of advisors like Craig. It undermines his confidence. The manipulation was masterful, reframing my legitimate concerns as psychological harm to Dad, positioning herself as the protector of his emotional well-being while I became the threat. "I just want to make sure he has all the information," I replied carefully. Vanessa smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Of course you do. We all want what's best for Richard. Just remember, stress affects his health. His blood pressure was elevated at his last checkup. Did he tell you that?" The doctor specifically mentioned reducing anxiety triggers. And with that final implied threat, that my questions could literally harm Dad's health, she kissed my cheek and closed the door. As I drove back to my apartment, replaying the conversation, I recognized Vanessa's technique from Uncle Henry's warnings about emotional manipulation in financial exploitation cases. "They'll weaponize love," he'd explained. "Make protecting your own interests seem like hurting someone you care about." The next morning, I called Uncle Henry and described the entire dinner interaction in detail. "Craig Donaldson," he repeated, his voice thoughtful. "The name sounds familiar." "Can you check him out?" I asked. "I tried searching online, but there's not much beyond his company website and some managed social media profiles." "I still have friends in the industry," Uncle Henry replied. "Let me make some calls." 2 weeks later, during my regular weekend visit to the island, Uncle Henry presented his findings. Craig Donaldson had been associated with 3 investment funds that had collapsed under questionable circumstances. While he had never been formally charged with wrongdoing, former clients had filed numerous complaints with regulatory bodies. Each time, Craig had rebranded under a new company name, shifted jurisdictions, and continued operations with a slightly altered approach. "He's what we used to call a edge walker," Uncle Henry explained. "Someone who operates just within technical legality while violating the spirit of securities regulations." More concerning was Craig's connection to a network of similar advisors who targeted wealthy individuals undergoing significant life transitions: divorce, death of a spouse, health, diagnoses, moments when decision-making might be compromised by emotional vulnerability. "They specifically look for situations like your father's," Uncle Henry said grimly. "Substantial assets, recent loss, new influential partner." The pattern was devastatingly clear. Craig identified targets through social networks, cultivated access through trusted connections, in this case Vanessa, established credibility through selective presentation of investment returns, created urgency through artificial scarcity, and gradually increased commitment levels once initial investments established trust. "What can we do?" I asked, staring at the lighthouse visible through Uncle Henry's kitchen window. Its solid presence suddenly a comfort in the face of such calculated predation. "Direct confrontation won't work," Uncle Henry cautioned. "Richard is in what we call the belief commitment phase. Having made initial investments, he's psychologically invested in believing Craig's legitimacy. Challenging that directly will only trigger defensiveness." Instead, Uncle Henry suggested a dual approach: documentation and parallel protection. We would meticulously track every investment recommendation, decision, and outcome in Dad's portfolio, building a comprehensive record of Craig's influence. Simultaneously, we would activate certain provisions in the Lighthouse Trust that would shield critical assets from potential riskier ventures. "Catherine and Richard built safeguards into their estate planning," Uncle Henry explained. "Triggers that could be activated if necessary. I've been reluctant to use them, hoping things wouldn't escalate to that point." "And now?" I asked. Uncle Henry looked out toward the lighthouse, its structure solid against the approaching evening storm. "Now we prepare for rough seas." The next 3 years followed a painful, predictable pattern. Dad's initial small investments with Craig yielded enough positive returns to build confidence, leading to increasingly larger commitments. Vanessa's influence grew alongside these financial successes, her suggestions carrying more weight as Craig's early recommendations appeared to validate her judgment. I completed my doctorate in marine biology, specializing in coastal ecosystem preservation, and secured a research position that frequently took me to remote field locations. These absences, while necessary for my career, created space for Vanessa to further isolate Dad from outside perspectives. By the time I recognized the extent of her control, she had successfully repositioned many of his long-standing friendships as draining or stuck in the past. Martin keeps bringing up those early startup days, she would say, referencing Dad's oldest friend and original business partner. I worry it keeps you anchored to the past instead of focusing on our future. Gradually, Dad's social circle contracted to people Vanessa had introduced: Craig's wife Melanie, couples from her yoga studio, neighbors from their luxury building. People with no historical knowledge of Dad before Vanessa, no memories of Mom, no way to recognize how dramatically his life priorities had shifted under Vanessa's influence. Through it all, Uncle Henry and I maintained our documentation project, cataloging every financial decision, every canceled friendship, every rewritten narrative about our family history. We weren't yet sure how or when this record would prove useful, but as Uncle Henry often reminded me, truth preserved is power deferred. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything. Dad's diagnosis came during a routine physical. He'd been experiencing occasional headaches and moments of confusion that he'd attributed to stress or lack of sleep. An MRI revealed the unthinkable: early onset, Alzheimer's at just 58 years old. I was in the Salish Sea on a 3-day research expedition when Vanessa called with the news. My first indication that something was wrong came from the carefully composed nature of her voice, too measured to be natural. "The doctor wants to run additional tests," she explained, the cellular connection crackling as my research vessel moved through a patch of spotty coverage. "It's early days, Emily. No need to interrupt your important work." The subtle emphasis on important work carried familiar barbs, the implication that my research took precedence over family obligations, the suggestion that I was choosing career over care. But beneath those practiced manipulations, I heard something new in Vanessa's tone: opportunity. I cut my expedition short despite her assurances that it was unnecessary. The research team leader, understanding the gravity of the situation, arranged for a boat to take me back to the mainland. By evening, I was at Swedish Medical Center, striding through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and artificial lavender. I found Dad sitting on the edge of an examination table, looking smaller somehow. The confident tech executive momentarily diminished by medical uncertainty. Vanessa stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder in a gesture that managed to appear both supportive and possessive. "Emmy," Dad said, his face brightening, "you didn't need to come rushing back. We've got things under control." "Of course I came," I replied, hugging him carefully, aware of the IV port in his arm. "What are the doctors saying?" Before Dad could answer, Vanessa interjected. "Dr. Winters is consulting with neurology about the next steps. They're fairly certain it's early-onset Alzheimer's, but they want to run a PET scan to confirm and assess progression." Her delivery was flawless, concerned yet composed, detailed yet digestible. She'd clearly been researching the terminology, preparing to navigate this new terrain with the same efficiency she'd applied to infiltrating our family. "I've already scheduled consultations with the top 3 specialists in Seattle," she continued, "and I'm researching clinical trials at UW Medicine." I recognized the strategy immediately. By positioning herself as the primary coordinator of Dad's care, Vanessa was establishing control of his medical narrative. The specialists would know her, communicate with her, view her as the decision-maker. Dad, processing the shock of his diagnosis, was already ceding this territory without realizing its implications. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Winters directly," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "As a research scientist, I'm familiar with reading clinical studies. I can help evaluate treatment options." A flash of annoyance crossed Vanessa's face, quickly masked by understanding concern. Of course, Emily. Though perhaps we should focus on supporting your father emotionally right now, rather than overwhelming him with technical discussions. Dad patted my hand. Vanessa's been amazing, Emmy. Already has a 3-ring binder with doctor profiles and treatment protocols. You know how I hate medical details. That was true. Dad had always deferred to Mom on healthcare decisions, trusting her scientific mind to analyze options and translate doctor speak into actionable plans. Now Vanessa was stepping into that role, wearing Mom's medical authority like she'd worn her apron, a poor fit disguised by confidence. Over the next few weeks, the diagnosis was confirmed. Dad's case was relatively early stage, but the disease was known for its unpredictable progression timelines. The cognitive symptoms might develop slowly or accelerate rapidly. The only certainty was uncertainty, a reality that Vanessa leveraged with masterful precision. Richard needs stability now, she explained during a family meeting that included Uncle Henry, who had traveled from the island to support us. Routine, familiar surroundings, minimal stress. We sat in the sterile conference room of a neurologist's office, surrounded by brain anatomy posters and pharmaceutical company calendars. Dad looked tired, the mental effort of processing medical information visibly taxing. The doctor mentioned cognitive reservation, Vanessa continued, referencing a term she'd clearly researched thoroughly. Activities that strengthen neural pathways. I've been looking into brain training programs, memory exercises. Uncle Henry spoke up, his first contribution to the conversation. Physical activity is also crucial for cognitive health. Richard, and I used to hike on the island. The Lighthouse Trail is perfect, familiar, scenic, moderately challenging. It was a strategic suggestion, reminding Dad of connections and experiences that predated Vanessa. The lighthouse had been part of family history long before she appeared, a tangible link to Mom and the research she'd loved. Vanessa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. San Juan Island is rather isolated, Henry. If Richard had a medical emergency, the ferry service could delay treatment. I think we should focus on activities closer to home, with better access to health care. The concern sounded reasonable, but the underlying message was clear. The island, and by extension, Uncle Henry and the memories associated with Mom, presented a risk that Vanessa would protect Dad from. The island has a medical clinic, I pointed out, and helicopter evacuation is available if necessary. Let's not get ahead of ourselves with evacuation scenarios, Vanessa replied with a practiced laugh. Richard finds city walks through the sculpture park quite stimulating, and our condo building has an excellent fitness center with trainers who specialize in senior health. Dad, who had never once referred to himself as a senior and had previously scoffed at the building's gentle aqua aerobics classes, nodded as though this had always been his preference. The doctors emphasized reducing stress, he said, repeating Vanessa's earlier point. The ferry schedules, the planning involved in island trips. It's a lot to manage now. Uncle Henry and I exchanged glances, recognizing defeat in this particular battle. The island, our sanctuary, our place of strategic planning, was being systematically removed from Dad's considerations. As the meeting concluded, Uncle Henry pulled me aside while Vanessa helped Dad schedule his next appointment. She's moving. Faster now, he murmured, his voice low. The diagnosis has accelerated her timeline. I nodded, having reached the same conclusion. She's establishing herself as his caregiver, his medical proxy, his decision-maker. We need to activate the secondary protocols, Uncle Henry said, using our code for the legal safeguards we'd been preparing. While Richard still has the capacity to participate. The secondary protocols referred to updated legal documentation, healthcare directives, power of attorney designations, and most importantly, a formal review of Dad's will and estate plans. With a lawyer who wasn't connected to Vanessa's network. Implementing these protective measures proved challenging. Vanessa had already scheduled Dad's days with a carefully calibrated mix of medical appointments, brain-healthy activities, and rest periods that she insisted were non-negotiable. Finding time for private conversations with Dad, let alone arranging meetings with our chosen attorney, required strategic planning worthy of a military operation. We found our opportunity 3 weeks after the diagnosis. Vanessa had committed to a charity luncheon she couldn't easily cancel without raising questions about her carefully crafted public image as a philanthropic socialite. Uncle Henry suggested a father-daughter lunch at Dad's favorite seafood restaurant near the waterfront. Fresh salmon is excellent for brain health, he noted when Vanessa hesitated. The omega-3 fatty acids. Yes, I'm well aware of the nutritional benefits, Vanessa interrupted, irritation briefly overriding her composed facade. She recalibrated quickly, smiling at Dad. That sounds lovely, doesn't it? A nice lunch while I'm at the Children's Hospital fundraiser. The restaurant, Anthony's, had been a family favorite since my childhood. Dad and I were seated at a window, table overlooking Elliott Bay, the familiar scent of sourdough bread and grilled fish bringing a comfort that the sleek condo never could. How are you really doing, Dad? I asked once our server had taken our orders and departed. He gazed out at the water, watching a ferry making its way toward Bainbridge Island. It's strange, knowing there's something in your brain that will eventually unmake you. He tapped his temple lightly. All those neural pathways your mother used to talk about, gradually tangling. The mention of Mom, unprompted, natural, gave me hope that Vanessa hadn't completely rewritten his inner narrative. I've been thinking about Mom a lot, I said, seizing the opening. About how she approached her illness. Dad nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. Catherine faced everything head-on, always wanted all the information, all the options, never let anyone make decisions for her. She trusted you, I said carefully, and she trusted Uncle Henry. Henry, Dad repeated, his expression warming. We should visit the lighthouse soon. Before. He trailed off, the unspoken future hanging between us. I reached across the table, taking his hand. Dad, I need to ask you something important. Have you reviewed your advance directives since the diagnosis? Healthcare proxy, power of attorney, those things? A flash of lucidity sharpened his features. Vanessa mentioned updating those. She has a lawyer friend who specializes in estate planning for situations like mine. Dad, I said gently, I think it's important to get independent advice. Someone who doesn't have a personal connection to any of us. He frowned slightly, processing this suggestion. You don't trust Vanessa's judgment? I chose my words carefully, aware that direct criticism would likely backfire. I think we should follow Mom's example, getting all the information, all the options, before making decisions. This approach resonated with him. Your mother would have insisted on at least 3 professional opinions, he said with a small laugh. Never trusted just one perspective. Uncle Henry knows an excellent elder law attorney, I continued, pressing my advantage. Margaret Chen. She has no connection to our family, no preconceptions. Would you be willing to meet with her? Just to get another viewpoint? Dad considered this, taking a sip of his water. It would need to fit into the schedule Vanessa's arranged. The doctors emphasized the importance of routine. We could schedule it during one of your free periods, I suggested. It wouldn't disrupt anything. He nodded slowly. All right, but let's not make a big production of it. Vanessa has been working so hard to organize everything. I recognized the influence of Vanessa's narrative, the portrayal of herself as the selfless caregiver whose efforts shouldn't be questioned or complicated. But I had achieved my immediate objective. Dad had agreed to meet with our attorney. One more thing, I said as our food arrived. The lighthouse property, Mom's research site. Have you discussed it with Vanessa? Dad looked momentarily confused. The lighthouse? No, I don't think it's come up. This confirmed my suspicion that Vanessa remained unaware of this significant asset. The property had been held in the specialty, Trust since before she entered our lives, and we had been careful not to mention it in her presence. I think we should keep it that way for now, I said quietly. It's a special place, sacred to Mom's memory. Dad nodded, seemingly relieved to have one space untouched by the whirlwind of changes Vanessa had implemented. Our secret, he agreed, with a conspiratorial smile that reminded me of the father I'd known before Vanessa's influence. We arranged the meeting with Margaret Chen for the following week, carefully scheduled during a 2-hour block when Vanessa attended her weekly spa treatment, a ritual she had declared essential for maintaining her strength as a caregiver. Margaret's office was in a converted Victorian home in Capitol Hill, its interior warm with wooden bookshelves and comfortable furniture that stood in stark contrast to the chrome and glass aesthetic of Craig Donaldson's financial firm. Mr. Wilson, Margaret greeted Dad, shaking his hand firmly. And Dr. Wilson, she added, acknowledging my recently completed doctorate. Your uncle has spoken highly of both of you. Uncle Henry had arrived early to brief Margaret on our concerns, ensuring she understood the delicate nature of the situation without forcing Dad to sit through a potentially upsetting discussion of Vanessa's manipulations. I understand you've received a difficult diagnosis, Margaret continued, guiding us to a seating area where tea had been prepared, and that you'd like to review your estate planning documents with fresh eyes. Dad nodded, accepting the cup she offered. My wife has been handling most of the arrangements, but Emmy thought... He paused, frowning slightly. I mean, my current wife, Vanessa. The slip was telling. His first wife, my mother, still occupied the primary position in his mental landscape, despite Vanessa's efforts. It's always wise to seek independent counsel for important legal matters, Margaret said smoothly, particularly when circumstances change. She led us through a comprehensive review of Dad's existing documents, will, trusts, advance directives, powers of attorney. With gentle but incisive questioning, she helped Dad articulate his true wishes regarding his care, his assets, and his legacy. You've mentioned your company shares several times, Margaret noted, making careful annotations. These seem particularly important to you. Dad nodded emphatically. They're Emmy's inheritance. Catherine and I built that company to secure our daughter's future. The shares stay in the family. Margaret glanced at me briefly, then returned her attention to Dad. Your current will doesn't reflect that intention. It indicates the shares would go to your wife Vanessa, with a small trust established for Emily's educational expenses. Dad's expression shifted to one of confusion. That can't be right. I would never... He trailed off, visibly distressed. When was this will executed? Margaret asked gently. Last year, Dad replied, his confidence faltering. Vanessa's lawyer friend drew it up. Craig recommended him. Craig Donaldson? Margaret clarified. Yes, he said estate planning was part of comprehensive financial management. Margaret nodded, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp with understanding. Would you like to revise these documents to better reflect your actual intentions? Dad looked at me, then at the documents spread before him. Yes, he said firmly. The company shares belong to Emmy. That was always the plan. Catherine's, and my plan. Over the next hour, Margaret carefully documented Dad's true wishes, preparing updated drafts that would more accurately reflect his intentions. She explained that given his diagnosis, it was essential to establish his mental capacity at the time of signing. I'll arrange for a geriatric psychiatrist to conduct an evaluation, she explained. This will help protect your wishes from potential challenges later. Challenges? Dad asked, bewildered. Who would challenge my wishes for my own daughter? Margaret's response was diplomatic but clear. In situations involving blended families and significant assets, it's not uncommon for disputes to arise. The capacity evaluation creates a record that you fully understood your decisions. As our meeting concluded, Margaret took me aside while Uncle Henry helped Dad gather his things. "The changes between his current will and his stated intentions are significant," she said quietly. "Someone has been exerting undue influence. The psychological evaluation will be crucial." "How quickly can we complete this process?" I asked, glancing at my watch. We had less than 40 minutes before Vanessa would return from her spa appointment. "I can expedite the drafting," Margaret assured me. "But the capacity evaluation, witnesses, proper execution, those will take time. And they should be done without pressure or the appearance of secrecy." "That's going to be difficult," I admitted. "Vanessa monitors his schedule carefully." Margaret's expression was sympathetic but resolute. "Then we need to be strategic. Each document has different requirements and priorities. We'll start with the most critical protections and work from there." We scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next week, carefully selected to coincide with another of Vanessa's standing commitments. As we left Margaret's office, I felt a cautious hope take root. We had begun the process of reclaiming Dad's true intentions from Vanessa's manipulations. That hope dimmed considerably when we arrived home to find Vanessa waiting in the lobby of the condo building. Her spa appointment apparently concluded early. "There you are," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp with suspicion. "The building manager mentioned you'd left together. I thought you were having lunch at the retirement community cafeteria." The retirement community reference was another of her subtle tactics, framing Dad's world in terms of aging and limitation rather than capability. "We decided on a drive instead," Uncle Henry replied smoothly. "The weather was too beautiful to stay indoors." "A drive," Vanessa repeated, her gaze moving from Uncle Henry to me, then settling on Dad. "Richard, you remember Dr. Winters emphasized routine and rest. Unexpected excursions can be taxing." Dad's earlier confidence seemed to waver under her scrutiny. "It was just a short drive, along the waterfront." "Well, you must be tired now," Vanessa said, taking his arm possessively. "Why don't we go upstairs so you can rest before dinner? I've invited Craig and Melanie over to discuss the portfolio adjustments." As she guided Dad toward the elevator, she glanced back at Uncle Henry and me. "Thank you both for the afternoon. Diversion? But perhaps check with me about schedule changes in the future?" The doctors have been very clear about the importance of consistency. The message was unmistakable. She was reasserting control, reminding us that she managed Dad's daily life and monitored his activities. Our window for independent action was narrowing. Once they had disappeared into the elevator, Uncle Henry turned to me. "She suspects something." "Yes," I agreed. "And she's accelerating her timeline." "Craig coming for dinner to discuss portfolio adjustments is concerning," Uncle Henry mused. "They're likely moving to consolidate financial control." We walked outside, moving toward Uncle Henry's car parked on the street. "Margaret said the full documentation process will take time," I explained. "Time we may not have if Vanessa is increasing her efforts." Uncle Henry was quiet for a moment, watching a seaplane take off from Lake Union in the distance. "Then we need to activate the primary safeguard," he said finally. "The Lighthouse Trust's special provisions." The primary safeguard was the most powerful protection Mom and Dad had built into their estate planning, a mechanism that would immediately freeze any major financial transactions pending review by designated trustees who included Uncle Henry and, upon my 28th birthday, me. "Is it time?" I asked, understanding the significance of this step. Once activated, these provisions would bring Vanessa's machinations into the open, transforming our quiet documentation into active opposition. Uncle Henry nodded soberly. "We can't wait for ideal circumstances. Richard's capacity is becoming a variable we can't predict. Better to move while we still have legal clarity." That evening, as Vanessa hosted Craig and Melanie in the downtown condo, Uncle Henry made the necessary calls to activate the Lighthouse Trust's protective provisions. By morning, notifications would be sent to all financial institutions holding Wilson family assets, requiring dual authorization for any transactions exceeding $10,000. The battle for Dad's legacy was moving from shadow to light, from documentation to direct confrontation. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I could almost hear Mom's voice carried on the wind off Puget Sound. Truth rises. Eventually, it always rises. The next phase would test everything Uncle Henry had taught me about patience, strategy, and the careful preservation of evidence. Vanessa had spent years building her influence over Dad and his assets. We were about to challenge that influence, directly triggering the confrontation we had long prepared for, but hoped to avoid. The lighthouse beacon, steadfast and unwavering for over a century, had always served two purposes: to guide ships safely home and to warn them of dangerous shores. Now, its trust would serve the same dual function, protecting Dad's true wishes while signaling to Vanessa that her carefully constructed narrative was about to face the harsh light of legal scrutiny. The storm broke at precisely 9:17 the next morning. I was in my university lab, preparing samples for the day's analysis, when my phone vibrated with Vanessa's name on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, a small act of resistance against her presumed authority. But concern for Dad overrode my reluctance. "Hello, Vanessa," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "What have you done?" The words came as a hiss, her carefully maintained composure fracturing around the edges. In the background, I could hear the distinctive sounds of the downtown condo, the subtle hum of the climate control system, the muted traffic noise from 30 floors below. "You'll need to be more specific," I replied, setting down my pipette and moving toward the privacy of my office. "Don't play innocent with me," Vanessa snapped. "The bank just called. Something about dual authorization requirements suddenly placed on our accounts. Craig is on his way over now to sort out this bureaucratic error. The fact that..." She'd immediately called Craig rather than discussing the matter with Dad was telling. Confirmation that their financial maneuvers had progressed further than we'd suspected. "It's not an error," I said simply. "It's a protective measure established years ago in my parents' estate planning." There was a moment of stunned silence before Vanessa's voice returned, now controlled to a surgical precision. "Your father and I are married. These are our joint accounts. Whatever outdated provisions your mother may have put in place are no longer relevant to our current situation." "Actually," I countered, "the provisions were updated and reconfirmed regularly, including after your marriage. Dad was quite clear about maintaining certain safeguards." Another silence, this one crackling with calculation. I could almost see her recalibrating, assessing this new information against her understanding of Dad's financial arrangements. "Richard never mentioned any such provisions," she finally said, doubt creeping into her certainty. "There were many things about my parents' financial planning that operated automatically, without requiring regular discussion," I explained. "The dual authorization requirement activates under specific conditions. Evidently, those conditions have been met." "What conditions?" Vanessa demanded. "What exactly are you implying?" I kept my tone matter of fact, learning from Uncle Henry that emotional escalation only provided manipulators with ammunition. "I'm not implying anything. The trust provisions are triggered by unusual transaction patterns or attempts to rapidly consolidate or liquidate family assets." The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line confirmed our suspicions. Vanessa and Craig had indeed been planning significant financial moves. "This is absurd," she said, voice rising despite her evident effort to remain calm. "Richard's medical care requires flexibility. These restrictions could impact his treatment options." It was a masterful pivot, reframing her financial agenda as concern for Dad's health care, positioning my protective actions as potential threats to his well-being. "Medical expenses are specifically excluded from the dual authorization requirement," I informed her, having reviewed the trust provisions thoroughly with Margaret Chen. The restrictions apply only to investment changes, property transfers, and large asset liquidations. The silence that followed was different from the others, a stillness that suggested not calculation but shock. She hadn't anticipated this level of detailed preparation. "I need to speak with Richard," she finally said. "This is a misunderstanding that we can clear up quickly." "I'm happy to join that conversation," I offered, knowing that Vanessa's influence over Dad was strongest when she had him alone. "I can be at the condo in 30 minutes. "That won't be necessary," she replied quickly. "Richard is resting. His morning medication makes him drowsy. I'll have him call you later." It was another manipulation tactic, using Dad's health as a barrier to direct communication. "I'll wait for his call," I said, not bothering to hide my skepticism. In the meantime, the dual authorization remains in effect. I ended the call and immediately phoned Uncle Henry, who was already en route to Seattle from the island. "Vanessa made contact," I reported. "She's called in Craig to fix the authorization requirements." "Expected," Uncle Henry replied, the sound of ferry announcements audible in the background. "Margaret filed the supplementary documentation this morning. The banks won't release the restrictions without proper authentication." "Vanessa claimed Dad is resting and can't speak with me," I continued. "She's isolating him." "Also expected?" Uncle Henry said grimly. "I've contacted Dr. Winters directly. Expressed concerns about Richard's access to family during this critical adjustment period. She's added a note to his file recommending regular contact with established support persons, specifically naming you and me." It was a smart countermove. Vanessa had been positioning herself as the medical authority in Dad's life. Using his actual doctor to emphasize the importance of broader family connection undermined that exclusive control. "I'm heading to the condo now," I decided. "If Vanessa tries to block access, I'll cite Dr. Winters' recommendation." "Be prepared for Craig to be there," Uncle Henry cautioned. "He won't be happy about the financial restrictions." That prediction proved accurate. When I arrived at the downtown high-rise 30 minutes later, the concierge informed me that Mr. Donaldson had arrived shortly after my call with Vanessa. The knowledge that Craig had been summoned so quickly, and that he had immediately responded, reinforced my suspicion that they had been planning significant financial moves. The private elevator to the penthouse level required a key fob, which Dad had given me months earlier, despite Vanessa's objection that security protocols recommended limiting access credentials. I used it now, ascending to the 30th floor, with a sense of entering contested territory. The elevator opened directly into the condo's marble foyer, where I immediately heard the tense cadence of an ongoing discussion from the adjacent living room. "Simply unreasonable," Craig was saying, his usual smooth confidence replaced by barely contained frustration. "The market opportunity we discussed has a limited window. These arbitrary restrictions could cost millions in potential gains." "There's nothing arbitrary about standard estate planning protections," came Uncle Henry's voice, surprising me with his presence. He must have caught an earlier ferry than expected. "Dual authorization is common practice for high-value family assets." I stepped into the living room to find an unexpected tableau. Uncle Henry sat calmly in one of the minimalist armchairs Vanessa had selected to replace Mom's comfortable furniture. Across from him, Craig paced like a caged predator, his designer suit failing to disguise the aggressive energy radiating from his movements. Vanessa stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand resting possessively on Dad's shoulder as he sat looking confused and distressed. "Emily," Dad said, brightening at my appearance. "Henry's been explaining about the Lighthouse Trust. I'd forgotten some of the details." Vanessa's fingers tightened visibly on his shoulder. "Richard is understandably confused by these sudden complications," she interjected. "His condition makes it difficult to process unexpected changes to established arrangements." It was a calculated statement, using Dad's diagnosis to undermine his agency while positioning herself as the interpreter of his needs and capabilities. "Actually," I replied, moving to Dad's other side and crouching to eye level. Dad's neurologist specifically noted that discussing familiar family matters helps maintain cognitive pathways. The lighthouse has been part of our family discussions for decades. Dad nodded, momentary clarity sharpening his features. Katie loved that lighthouse. Spent every summer studying the tidal pools nearby. The unprompted mention of Mom visibly discomfited Vanessa, whose careful narrative had gradually excised Catherine Wilson from family conversations, except when strategically useful. Craig, apparently uninterested in these familial dynamics, cut to his primary concern. This trust mechanism is interfering with time-sensitive investment opportunities. The tech startup I discussed requires commitment within the next 48 hours. Uncle Henry's expression remained impassive. What's the projected return on this particular opportunity, Mr. Donaldson? My clients have seen consistent 20% plus annual returns, Craig replied with rehearsed precision. This particular venture has disruptive potential in the healthcare AI space, especially relevant given Richard's situation. It was a clever angle, linking the investment to Dad's medical needs, making any objection seem callous or obstructive. Interesting, Uncle Henry said mildly. Because my analysis of your previous 3 healthcare technology investments shows initial promising returns, followed by substantial losses in years 2 and 3. The pattern suggests early investor exit strategies that benefit advisors like yourself while leaving later participants with devalued positions. Craig's face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. That's a gross mischaracterization of complex market dynamics. Early-stage investments naturally involve volatility. Indeed, Uncle Henry agreed pleasantly, which is why the Wilson Family Trust includes volatility limitations and diversification requirements, precisely the provisions you're attempting to circumvent with this rushed commitment strategy. Dad looked between Uncle Henry and Craig with growing comprehension. Henry's always been conservative with investments, he said slowly. Balanced diversity across risk profiles. Catherine trusted his judgment implicitly. Vanessa, sensing the narrative slipping from her control, attempted to redirect. Richard, sweetheart, you're getting tired. Remember what Dr. Winters said about mental fatigue exacerbating symptoms. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time. It was another tactical deployment of Dad's health concerns to curtail conversations threatening her agenda, a strategy I'd seen her employ with increasing frequency since his diagnosis. Actually, I interjected, Dr. Winters specifically recommended maintaining normal family interactions as beneficial for cognitive function. She's added it to Dad's care notes. Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose fractionally, the only visible indication of her surprise at this counter-move. I speak with Dr. Winters daily. She hasn't mentioned this to me. The recommendation was added this morning, I explained, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm sure she'll discuss it at your next consultation. The subtle power shift was palpable in the room. For perhaps the first time since she had entered our lives, Vanessa was encountering coordinated resistance that had anticipated her usual tactics. Craig, less adept at concealing his frustration, checked his watch with deliberate emphasis. This is all very interesting family dynamics, but we have practical matters to resolve. The financial restrictions need to be lifted by close of business today if we're to secure the investment position. That won't be possible, Uncle Henry replied calmly. The trust provisions require a 7-day review period for any transaction exceeding $200,000. It's a cooling-off mechanism designed specifically to prevent hastily made investment decisions. A week? Craig exclaimed, abandoning any pretense of professional detachment. The opportunity will be gone by then. If the investment can't withstand basic due diligence timeframes, Uncle Henry observed, perhaps that's information worth considering before commitment. Dad, who had been following this exchange with increasing attention, suddenly spoke with unexpected clarity. Henry's right. We never rushed investments. That was our policy from the beginning. Katie always said, "If someone's rushing you, they're hiding something." The mention of Mom's financial wisdom, a central part of the family's success that Vanessa had systematically minimized, seemed to strengthen Dad's resolve. He straightened in his chair, gently removing Vanessa's hand from his shoulder. "I think we should observe the waiting period," he said with decision that had been absent in recent months. "Review the proposal thoroughly. Get independent analysis." Vanessa's composure slipped momentarily, genuine alarm replacing her cultivated concern. "Richard, we discussed this extensively yesterday. You were excited about the potential returns, the cutting-edge technology. Craig has reserved this opportunity specifically for us." The manipulation was transparent, claiming prior enthusiasm that Dad couldn't recall, creating artificial scarcity, implying social obligation to Craig. It had likely worked countless times before when Dad was isolated from alternative perspectives. "I don't remember discussing specific investments yesterday," Dad admitted, his momentary confidence wavering. Vanessa seized on this uncertainty. "Of course you don't, sweetheart. The memory lapses are part of your condition. That's why we agreed I would handle these details." It was a brutal tactic, using Dad's diagnosis to undermine his agency and enforce dependency on her judgment. I watched his expression falter, the brief clarity giving way to confusion and self-doubt. Uncle Henry intervened with characteristic gentleness. "Richard, investment decisions have always been documented in your family. If you and Vanessa discuss this opportunity in detail, there should be analysis paperwork, projected returns, risk assessments, the standard materials you've always reviewed." Dad nodded, clinging to this familiar process. "Yes, the documentation folder. We always kept a file for each major investment." Craig and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance that confirmed no such documentation existed. The extensive discussion Vanessa had referenced was likely a brief, controlled presentation of selected benefits without the rigorous analysis Dad had always conducted before his illness. "The materials are in digital format now," Vanessa improvised smoothly. "Environmental considerations, I can have them printed if that would be helpful." "That would be excellent," Uncle Henry agreed, calling her bluff. "In fact, I suggest we review them now, while Richard is alert and engaged. Emily and I can provide additional perspectives, just like family investment discussions in the past." Craig's expression darkened as he recognized the trap closing around their hastily constructed narrative. "I'll need to retrieve the complete file from my office. The summary documents wouldn't provide the depth of analysis you're suggesting." "Of course," Uncle Henry replied pleasantly. "We wouldn't want to make decisions without complete information. The 7-day review period will allow time for thorough analysis." With their immediate financial agenda effectively blocked, Craig made his excuses and departed, promising to return with comprehensive documentation. The tension in the room shifted as the door closed behind him, leaving the core family dynamic exposed. Dad looked tired now, the mental effort of the confrontation taking its toll. "I think I will rest for a while," he said, rising slowly from his chair. "I'll help you, sweetheart," Vanessa offered immediately, moving to support him. "Actually," I interjected gently, "I'd like a few minutes with Dad. We haven't had much one-on-one time recently." Before Vanessa could object, Dad nodded. "That would be nice, Emmy. We could sit in the study." The study was what remained of Dad's home office space, significantly reduced during Vanessa's redecoration of the condo. Once a room filled with books and mementos from his tech career, it was now a stylized space that seemed designed more for architectural magazines than actual use. Still, it provided the privacy we needed. As I helped Dad settle into the ergonomic chair that had replaced his beloved old leather one, Vanessa lingered in the doorway. "I'll be right outside if you need anything, Richard. Remember, Dr. Winters recommended keeping emotional stress to a minimum." The implied characterization of conversation with me as potentially stressful didn't escape my notice. "We'll just catch up on my research," I assured her with deliberate misunderstanding of her concern. Dad's always been interested in the marine preservation work. Reluctantly, Vanessa withdrew, though I suspected she might attempt to listen from the hallway. I closed the door and moved a chair close to Dad's, speaking softly. "How are you really doing, Dad?" He rubbed his temples, the gesture achingly familiar from my childhood when he was working through complex coding problems. "It's confusing sometimes, like trying to program with corrupted memory registers. I know things are important, but I can't always access the why." The technical analogy was so characteristic of him that I felt tears threatening. This was still my father, the brilliant mind that had built innovative software systems, now struggling with his own neural architecture's degradation. "The Lighthouse Trust," he continued, focusing with visible effort. "Henry and I set it up after your mother's diagnosis. She insisted we needed safeguards against exactly this kind of situation." He gave a small, sad laugh. "Katie always saw 10 steps ahead." "She did," I agreed, taking his hand. "That's why she made sure the trust included special provisions." Dad nodded, his gaze momentarily sharp with recognition. "The Codicil. Henry mentioned it earlier, but..." Vanessa changed the subject before he could explain fully. "The Codicil is an amendment to your will," I explained gently. "It's designed to activate under specific circumstances, like someone attempting to divert your company shares away from family control." Dad's expression hardened with surprising clarity. "The shares are yours, Emmy. That was always the plan. Your inheritance, your security." "I know, Dad," I reassured him. "And the Codicil helps ensure that happens, even if someone tries to change the arrangements. It's a fail-safe Mom helped design." He smiled faintly. "She always said systems need redundancy, especially when protecting what matters most." We sat quietly for a moment, the weight of memories and future uncertainties settling around us, like dust motes in the afternoon light filtering through the window. "Vanessa doesn't know about all the provisions," Dad said suddenly, his voice dropping even lower. "I never told her about the lighthouse property's full value or the trust structure. Katie thought it was better that way." This confirmation that Dad had deliberately withheld information from Vanessa, acting on Mom's advice even after her death, was powerful validation of the path Uncle Henry and I had taken. "We've been documenting everything," I told him, matching his hushed tone. "All the financial changes, the investment recommendations, the isolation tactics. Margaret Chen is helping us prepare for whatever comes next." Dad squeezed my hand. "Good. That's good." He paused, struggling visibly with his next words. "I'm not always reliable now. The clarity comes and goes. But when it's here, I want you to know I understand what's happening. I see the patterns, even when I can't always respond to them." Tears filled my eyes at this glimpse of my father's enduring awareness, trapped inside an increasingly unreliable cognitive framework. "We'll protect what matters, Dad. The company shares, the lighthouse, Mom's legacy, all of it." He nodded, then looked toward the door with a subtle shift in expression that suggested our private time was ending. Sure enough, there was a soft knock, and Vanessa appeared with practiced concern. "Richard should take his medication now," she announced, holding a small pill cup and water. The neurologist was very clear about maintaining the schedule precisely. Dad accepted the medication without protest, the moment of connection between us already fading as the daily routines of his care reasserted their dominance. Vanessa helped him to his feet with the practiced movements of someone who had made caring a performance art, attentive enough to demonstrate devotion while subtly reinforcing dependency. "We should let him rest now," she told me firmly. "Cognitive exertion accelerates fatigue." I stood, recognizing that pushing further would only create stress for Dad. "I'll visit again tomorrow," I promised him. Maybe we can look at those old lighthouse photos. A smile flickered across his face. I'd like that, Emmy. As Vanessa guided him toward the bedroom, I returned to the living room where Uncle Henry waited, his expression suggesting he had used our absence for his own reconnaissance. She's been going through Richard's office files, he murmured as we moved toward the elevator. The cabinet in the living room was recently disturbed, papers rearranged, folders accessed. Looking for information about the trust, I surmised. Uncle Henry nodded. She knows she's missing critical pieces of the puzzle. The financial restrictions caught her completely off guard. Dad confirmed he never told her about the lighthouse. Property's full value or the trust structure, I reported. He said Mom advised him to keep certain things separate. Catherine always had good instincts about people, Uncle Henry said as we entered the elevator. And she understood the importance of contingency planning. As the doors closed and we began our descent, I felt a curious mixture of hope and apprehension. The confrontation had revealed both Vanessa's vulnerabilities and the increasing unpredictability of Dad's condition. We had won this initial skirmish by blocking the immediate financial threat, but Vanessa's control over Dad's daily life remained, nearly absolute. What happens now? I asked, as the elevator reached the lobby level. Uncle Henry's expression was somber. Now the real battle begins. Vanessa knows we've activated protective measures. She'll accelerate her timeline, looking for ways to work around the restrictions. And she'll intensify efforts to isolate Richard from our influence. As we stepped into the Seattle afternoon, gray clouds gathering over Elliott Bay in the distance, I understood that we had crossed a threshold. The years of quiet documentation and strategic preparation had served their purpose, laying groundwork for this moment when shadow tactics gave way to open conflict. The lighthouse beam had always served dual purposes, guiding ships safely home while warning of dangerous shores. Its trust would now serve similar functions for our family, protecting Dad's true wishes while illuminating Vanessa's deceptions with the uncompromising light of legal scrutiny. The storm was upon us, and the beacon was lit. 3 weeks after our confrontation at the downtown condo, I was knee-deep in the frigid waters of Commencement Bay, collecting microplastic samples when my research assistant waded toward me, holding my phone above the water. "Emily, it's your uncle," she said, concern etched across her face. "He says it's urgent." Water sloshed around my waders as I straightened, taking the phone with still-gloved hands. "Uncle Henry? What's happened?" "Richard's been hospitalized." His voice carried the controlled urgency of someone measuring their words carefully. "Swedish Medical Center, Neurology Wing. You need to come immediately." My stomach dropped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Vanessa claims he fell in the bathroom," Uncle Henry replied, his skepticism evident even through the phone connection. "But the attending physician has noted inconsistencies in her account. The pattern of bruising doesn't match a simple fall, and despite her insistence that she never leaves him unattended because of his condition, she admits he was alone when it happened." I signaled to my team to continue without me, already stripping off my sampling gloves. "I'm on my way. What room?" "That's another issue," Uncle Henry said, his voice dropping lower. "Vanessa is trying to restrict visitor access. She's told the hospital staff that Richard's fragile emotional state requires limiting external stimulation." "On what authority?" I demanded, yanking off my waders with clumsy, hurried movements. "She's presented documentation naming her as Richard's healthcare proxy. Apparently signed last week." My hands froze. "That's impossible. We had the dual authorization in place for any legal changes." "The healthcare proxy falls outside the financial trust restrictions," Uncle Henry explained, confirming my worst fears. "It's a separate legal instrument. Margaret is already working on challenging it, but for now, Vanessa has significant control over Richard's care decisions and visitor access." As I drove toward Seattle, breaking speed limits on the rain-slick interstate, I processed the implications. The sudden health crisis, the conveniently timed healthcare proxy, the efforts to restrict family access, these weren't coincidences but calculated moves in Vanessa's accelerating endgame. With the financial blockade we'd established limiting her access to Dad's assets, she had shifted tactics to consolidate control through healthcare decisions instead. Swedish Medical Center rose like a gleaming fortress against the gray Seattle skyline. I found parking in the emergency lot, not caring about the potential ticket, and hurried through sliding doors into the antiseptic-scented interior. The neurology ward was hushed with the artificial calm of contained crisis when I arrived, finding Uncle Henry in a small waiting area, his weathered face grave with concern. "She's been with him continuously since admission," he reported in a low voice, rising to embrace me briefly. "The nursing staff have been instructed that he needs minimal stimulation and familiar presence only. I've only managed a 5-minute visit by insisting on my legal right as family." "Have you seen the healthcare proxy document?" I asked, dropping my still damp backpack onto a nearby chair. Uncle Henry nodded grimly. Margaret had the hospital legal department send her a copy. "It appears properly executed, Richard's signature, witness signatures, notarization, but the timing is highly suspicious. It was signed 2 days after we blocked the financial transactions. And conveniently before this mysterious fall," I added, the pattern clarifying with disturbing precision. "Have you spoken with his regular neurologist, Dr. Winters?" "She's at a conference in Boston. The attending physician is someone new, Dr. Patel. Seems competent, but has no history." With Richard's case, perfect opportunity for Vanessa to establish herself as the primary authority on his condition and care, I noted bitterly. "What's Margaret's strategy for challenging the proxy?" "She's arranged for a geriatric psychiatrist specializing in capacity assessment to evaluate Richard. If he lacked capacity when signing the document, it can be invalidated." Uncle Henry checked his watch. "Dr. Levinson should arrive within the hour. Until then, we need to find a way for you to see Richard directly." As if summoned by our conversation, a woman in a white coat approached, tablet in hand. Her ID badge identified her as Dr. Ananya Patel, neurology. "Your family members?" she asked, glancing between us with the efficient assessment of someone perpetually behind schedule. "I'm Emily Wilson, Richard's daughter," I replied quickly. "And this is Henry Mitchell, his brother-in-law and healthcare agent under his previous directives." Dr. Patel nodded, consulting her tablet. "Mr. Wilson's condition has stabilized since admission. The CT scan shows no acute bleeding from the fall, but there appears to be an acceleration of inflammatory markers in regions associated with memory and executive function compared to his baseline scans from 3 months ago. I need to see my father," I said, keeping my voice level but firm. "Mrs. Wilson has requested limited visitation," Dr. Patel responded, her tone neutral but her eyes evaluative. As his designated healthcare proxy, she has significant input regarding visitor management. "I'm his daughter," I repeated, holding her gaze. "And I haven't been permitted to speak with him since his admission nearly 12 hours ago." Something shifted in Dr. Patel's expression, a subtle recognition of the situation underlying the clinical facts. "The proxy designation grants Mrs. Wilson certain authorities," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "But it doesn't allow complete exclusion of immediate family. I can permit a short visit while she's meeting with the social worker regarding discharge planning." I recognized the professional courtesy for what it was, a quiet resistance to Vanessa's overreach. "Thank you. We won't agitate him." Dr. Patel led us through security doors into the neurology wing, her badge granting access with a soft electronic chirp. "Room 426, she indicated, stopping at a nurse's station to make a note in the chart. 15 minutes should be sufficient before Mrs. Wilson returns from her meeting. Dad's room was dimly lit, the afternoon sunlight reduced to thin slats through partially closed blinds. The rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment provided a clinical counterpoint to the unnatural stillness. He looked diminished against the institutional bedding, a large purple bruise spreading across his left temple and disappearing into his hairline. The sight of that discoloration, its size and placement inconsistent with a simple bathroom fall, sent a surge of protective fury through me. "Dad," I said softly, approaching the bed. "It's Emmy." His eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus in the dim light. "Emmy? Is that you?" His voice was weaker than I'd heard it before, with a slight slurring that hadn't been present during our last visit. "Did you check the lighthouse windows? The winter storms can crack the seals." My heart clenched at this confusion. He was referencing our old ritual of inspecting the lighthouse after winter gales, something we hadn't done in years. "Not today, Dad. You're in the hospital. There was an accident." He frowned, wincing as the expression pulled at the bruised area. "Hospital? I don't remember coming here." Uncle Henry moved to the opposite side of the bed. "Richard, what's the last thing you do remember clearly?" Dad's gaze drifted, searching invisible memories. "Papers," he said finally. "Important papers." Vanessa was very insistent, said there wasn't much time. His fingers plucked restlessly at the hospital blanket. "Something about care decisions. Vanessa said you might interfere with proper treatment, that I needed to give her authority to protect me from misguided family influence." The calculated manipulation was breathtaking, using our own protective measures as justification for consolidating her control. "Did you read these papers before signing them?" Uncle Henry asked gently. Dad's expression clouded further. "She summarized them. Said there wasn't time for legal minutia with my condition declining." His fingers continued their restless movement. "I was very tired that day, more than usual. Vanessa had adjusted my medication. Said the doctor recommended higher doses for anxiety management." Uncle Henry and I exchanged a glance laden with dark suspicion. "And after you signed these papers," I asked, "what happened?" "More medication, for sleep. Then," his voice trailed off, confusion returning to his features. "Then I woke up here, with this." His hand drifted toward the bruise on his temple before dropping back to the bed, as if the effort was too great. Before we could pursue this concerning narrative further, a subtle change in Dad's expression alerted me to a presence behind us. I turned to find Vanessa in the doorway, her designer outfit incongruously perfect against the clinical setting, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to controlled displeasure. "Emily, Henry, I wasn't informed you were visiting." The words were polite, the tone decidedly not. "Richard needs rest, not interrogation." She moved to Dad's bedside with practiced efficiency, adjusting his blanket and checking the monitors with performative care. "The social worker is helping arrange transfer to a specialized memory care facility, sweetheart. Somewhere with 24-hour supervision to prevent further accidents." The emphasis she placed on accidents sent a chill through me. "That seems premature," I interjected, maintaining my position beside Dad. "His home environment is familiar, which benefits cognitive function." Vanessa's smile remained fixed as she smoothed Dad's hair back from the bruised temple with gentle fingers that nonetheless made him wince. "The medical team disagrees. After this fall, they're concerned about his safety in a multi-level condo. The memory care facility has secured areas designed specifically for wandering prevention." "Wandering?" I repeated incredulously. "Dad has never exhibited wandering behavior." "Not that you've observed," Vanessa countered smoothly. "But then, you're not with him daily as I am." The nighttime confusion has been increasing for weeks. It was another unprovable assertion, a symptom conveniently manifesting only during periods when no one but Vanessa was present to observe it. Dad stirred, his hand seeking mine. "No institution," he said with surprising clarity. home, with Emmy. A flash of genuine alarm crossed Vanessa's face before she reset her expression to compassionate concern. Sweetheart, Emmy's busy with her research. She can't provide the round-the-clock care you need. Remember how we discussed this? The facility will help maintain your independence while ensuring your safety. The calculated doublespeak was staggering, claiming institutional care would maintain independence, while suggesting family support would somehow diminish it. I want to see the lighthouse, Dad insisted, his voice stronger than it had been moments before. Before it's too late. Vanessa's gaze darted between Uncle Henry and me, clearly confused by this fixation. There's no lighthouse, Richard. That's the confusion talking. Seattle has no operating lighthouses. He means the family property on San Juan Island, Uncle Henry explained, his tone deliberately casual. A historic lighthouse Richard and Catherine purchased years ago. Special memories for the family. Vanessa's carefully composed expression couldn't quite conceal her surprise. I'm not aware of any such property. It's held in a specialty trust, Uncle Henry continued, maintaining his mild tone while delivering information that fundamentally altered Vanessa's understanding of our family's assets. Separate from the resources you manage. I watched Vanessa absorb this revelation, visibly recalculating her understanding of our family's holdings and legal structures. Well, she said finally, that's hardly relevant to Richard's current medical needs. The doctors are recommending specialized institutional care, not nostalgic outings. Actually, I countered, drawing on my scientific training, familiar environments with strong emotional connections have been shown to temporarily improve cognitive function in Alzheimer's patients. A visit to a significant location could provide valuable baseline data for his treatment team. Before Vanessa could object further, the door opened to admit Dr. Patel, accompanied by an older man whose ID badge identified him as Dr. Levinson, geriatric psychiatry. Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Patel began, Dr. Levinson has been asked to consult on your husband's case. He specializes in capacity assessments for patients with cognitive decline. Vanessa's spine stiffened visibly. Requested by whom? I'm my husband's healthcare proxy, and I made no such request. The request came through appropriate legal channels, Dr. Levinson explained, his tone professionally neutral despite the tension crackling in the room. When questions arise regarding recently executed medical directives, hospital policy requires independent capacity assessment. The intervention must have come through Margaret Chen, fulfilling her ethical obligation to verify that Dad had been capable of understanding the healthcare proxy designation Vanessa had obtained. This is completely unnecessary, Vanessa objected, her composure slipping visibly. Richard clearly designated me as his healthcare proxy last week. The documentation is properly executed and notarized. Documentation executed during periods of questionable capacity requires verification, Dr. Levinson replied evenly. I'll need to conduct a private assessment with Mr. Wilson. I should be present, Vanessa insisted. As his wife and caregiver, I can help interpret his responses. His communication can be affected by his condition. It was another attempt to control the narrative, to position herself as the translator of Dad's wishes, rather than allowing his direct expression. That would compromise the assessment's independence, Dr. Levinson stated firmly. Standard. Protocol requires one-on-one interaction without family presence, regardless of proxy status. Vanessa's carefully maintained facade cracked further, a flush rising beneath her perfect makeup. This feels like an orchestrated attempt to undermine my authority. My husband designated me as his healthcare decision-maker precisely because he trusted my judgment over others who have been notably absent from his daily care. The pointed glance in my direction carried unmistakable accusation. The assessment is standard procedure, Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Patel interjected, her professional tone hiding any personal judgment. While it's conducted, perhaps you could assist. Our social worker with insurance documentation for the potential facility transfer. It was a tactical suggestion, giving Vanessa a face-saving exit while separating her from Dad during the crucial evaluation. After Vanessa reluctantly departed with Dr. Patel, Dr. Levinson turned to Uncle Henry and me. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Wilson alone as well," he explained. "But first, I'd like to understand your concerns regarding the recently executed healthcare proxy." We outlined our observations: the suspicious timing of the proxy designation immediately following our financial blockade, Dad's inconsistent cognitive states, the convenient fall that had precipitated this hospitalization, and most significantly, his statements about signing papers without fully understanding their implications. Dr. Levinson listened attentively, making occasional notes. "These are concerning patterns," he acknowledged. "The capacity assessment will help clarify whether Mr. Wilson understood the nature and consequences of the healthcare designation at the time of signing." As Uncle Henry and I stepped into the hallway, I found myself trembling with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The independent assessment offered our first real opportunity to challenge Vanessa's legal authority, but it also represented a painful public examination of Dad's diminishing capabilities. "This could change everything," Uncle Henry murmured, as we took seats in a small consultation room Dr. Levinson had arranged for us. "If the proxy is invalidated, decision-making reverts to the previously established advance directives, which named both of us as his healthcare agents," I confirmed, remembering the careful planning we'd done before Vanessa's influence had begun reshaping Dad's legal arrangements. "There's more," Uncle Henry said, lowering his voice further. "Margaret filed an emergency petition this morning questioning not just the proxy designation, but Vanessa's medication management practices." My mind flashed to Dad's comment about Vanessa adjusting his medication before the proxy signing. "You think she's been manipulating his dosages?" "The pattern fits," Uncle Henry replied grimly. "Periods of extreme confusion coinciding with important legal decisions, followed by improved clarity when outside observers are present. The systematic nature of such manipulation, using Dad's legitimate medical needs as a weapon against his autonomy, made my stomach clench with mingled fury and grief." Dr. Levinson's assessment took nearly an hour. When he finally emerged, his expression was professionally neutral, but the subtle tightening around his eyes suggested troubling findings. "I've completed my evaluation," he informed us. "I'll be submitting a formal report to the Ethics Committee, but I can tell you that Mr. Wilson shows significant fluctuations in cognitive function. His capacity appears to vary dramatically, even within our single session." "What does that mean for the healthcare proxy?" I asked directly. "When documentation is executed during periods of questionable capacity," Dr. Levinson replied carefully, "the legal standard requires clear evidence that the patient understood the nature and implications of their decisions at the time of signing. Based on my assessment, Mr. Wilson currently cannot reliably recall either the content of the documents he signed or his reasoning for doing so." It was exactly what we had suspected. Vanessa had obtained Dad's signature during a period of confusion, likely exacerbated by medication. "My recommendation will be to temporarily suspend the recently executed proxy pending further evaluation," Dr. Levinson continued. "In the interim, the previous advance directives should be considered operative." This conclusion represented our first significant victory against Vanessa's manipulation, a professional validation of concerns we had documented for years. Dr. Levinson hesitated, then added with careful precision, "I should also note that Mr. Wilson expressed concerns about his medication management. He described feeling unusually disoriented after taking what he was told were his prescribed medications. Given these statements and the pattern of cognitive fluctuation, I've ordered a comprehensive toxicology screen." The implication hung in the air between us. The possibility that Vanessa had been manipulating Dad's medication regimen to enhance his confusion during key decision points. As Dr. Levinson departed to complete his formal report, Uncle Henry and I absorbed the weight of these developments. If toxicology screening revealed medication mismanagement, the implications would extend far beyond invalidating the healthcare proxy, potentially entering the realm of criminal elder abuse. Our moment of reflection was interrupted by raised voices from the direction of Dad's room. We hurried back to find Vanessa confronting a nurse who was preparing to draw blood samples. "This additional testing is completely unnecessary," Vanessa was insisting, standing between the nurse and Dad's bed. "Dr. Patel has already ordered the standard panels. These additional tests are redundant and burdensome." The toxicology screen was ordered by Dr. Levinson as part of his geriatric assessment, the nurse explained with professional patience. "It's standard procedure in cases involving cognitive fluctuation. My husband doesn't need to be subjected to additional needle sticks for unnecessary tests," Vanessa persisted, her voice rising. "As his healthcare proxy, I'm declining this procedure." I stepped forward. "The proxy designation has been temporarily suspended pending review," I stated, grateful for Dr. Levinson's immediate action. "The previous advance directives naming Henry Mitchell and myself as healthcare agents are now in effect." Vanessa turned, her expression shifting from authoritative to furious in an instant. "That's absurd. A single doctor cannot invalidate a legally executed document without due process. In cases of suspected incapacity or undue influence, healthcare facilities have both the right and obligation to implement protective measures pending formal review," Uncle Henry explained calmly. "The Hospital Ethics Committee has been notified and will convene to assess the situation. Until then, Richard's previous directives stand." The nurse, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation but professionally resolute, moved toward Dad's bed. "I need to collect these samples now, Mrs. Wilson. Hospital security has been notified of the situation and will assist if necessary." It was the first time I'd seen Vanessa's composure completely fracture. "This is outrageous," she hissed, color flooding her carefully made-up face. "You'll be hearing from my attorney, all of you." She grabbed her designer handbag from the bedside chair and stormed from the room, the door swinging violently in her wake. Dad, who had observed this exchange with unusual clarity, exhaled slowly as the nurse began preparing his arm for the blood draw. "She's been adjusting my medications," he said quietly, his gaze meeting mine. "Different pills some days. More when important people were visiting. Less when you or Henry were scheduled to come." The nurse pretended professional deafness to this statement, but her careful documentation of the time and circumstances of the sample collection suggested she was well aware of its potential significance. The toxicology results, delivered the following morning, confirmed our worst suspicions. Dad's bloodstream contained significantly higher levels of benzodiazepines than his prescribed dosage, along with traces of a sedative that hadn't been prescribed at all. When these findings were presented to Dr. Patel, she immediately contacted the hospital's legal department and adult protective services. Events accelerated rapidly after that. A hospital security officer was stationed outside Dad's room, with strict instructions regarding approved visitors. Vanessa's access was limited to supervised visits pending investigation. The previously planned transfer to the memory care facility was canceled, with Dad's care plan reverting to the preferences outlined in his original advance directives. Most significantly, Adult Protective Services launched a formal investigation into potential elder abuse. A social worker named Rivera interviewed each of us separately, her questions detailed and probing, her manner suggesting she had encountered similar situations before. Financial exploitation often escalates to medical manipulation when the victim begins showing resistance or awareness, she explained during our session. The pattern you've documented, systematic isolation, gradual asset diversion, and now medication mismanagement, is unfortunately consistent with cases we've seen. "What happens now?" I asked, still processing the reality that our long-held suspicions had been validated in the most disturbing way possible. "The investigation proceeds on multiple fronts," Ms. Rivera explained. "The financial aspects will be examined by forensic accountants. the medication issues trigger potential criminal charges. Meanwhile, our priority is ensuring your father's immediate safety and appropriate care. That care became the focus of my attention in the following days. With the healthcare proxy invalidated and Uncle Henry and I reinstated as Dad's medical decision-makers, we faced the immediate challenge of determining the best environment for his recovery and ongoing support. The institutional memory care facility Vanessa had selected, with its emphasis on security rather than stimulation, was clearly inappropriate. Yet Dad's cognitive decline, while potentially exacerbated by medication manipulation, remained a reality requiring specialized care. The solution emerged during one of Dad's increasingly frequent periods of clarity. "I want to see the lighthouse," he repeated, with a persistence that suggested deeper meaning than simple nostalgia. "I need to be there again, before it's too late." Uncle Henry and I exchanged glances, considering possibilities we hadn't previously explored. The San Juan Island property, remote, peaceful, connected to Mom's memory in ways the Seattle condo could never be, might offer exactly the environment Dad needed. Would living at the lighthouse be possible? I asked Uncle Henry that evening as we sat in the hospital cafeteria reviewing options. It would need significant modifications for his care. Uncle Henry considered this, his expression thoughtful. The keeper's quarters could be adapted. We'd need full-time nursing support, equipment, accessibility improvements. He trailed off, mentally calculating logistics. It would require substantial investment, but the trust has adequate resources, and Richard would be surrounded by Catherine's memory in a way that might benefit his cognitive state. The planning accelerated from there. Margaret Chen helped navigate the legal requirements for establishing a specialized care facility in a historic property. An architect with experience in aging-in-place design developed modification plans that preserved the lighthouse's character while accommodating Dad's needs. A specialized medical transport service was engaged to manage the journey once Dad was stable enough to travel. Throughout these preparations, the investigation into Vanessa's actions continued. The financial forensics revealed patterns more disturbing than even we had suspected. Craig Donaldson's investment schemes had siphoned nearly 30% of Dad's liquid assets into vehicles that generated excessive management fees while exposing him to disproportionate risk. More damning were the connections between these investments and offshore accounts tied to both Craig and, surprisingly, Vanessa, suggesting a level of premeditated collaboration that contradicted her claims of being merely influenced by Craig's expertise. The medication manipulation evidence proved equally compelling. A search warrant executed at the downtown condo discovered a concealed lockbox containing prescription medications in quantities inconsistent with Dad's treatment plan, along with handwritten notes in Vanessa's precise script detailing optimal timing windows for certain decisions that correlated exactly with periods when Dad would have been most susceptible to suggestion. Most damning was Vanessa's day planner, seized during the investigation, which contained detailed tracking of Dad's medication responses, noting when he was most manageable or susceptible to financial discussions. The systematic nature of this documentation transformed what might have been dismissed as caregiver overreach into evidence of calculated exploitation. 3 weeks after his hospitalization, Dad was deemed stable enough for transfer to the lighthouse property. The medical transport helicopter settled gently in the clearing near Uncle Henry's cabin on a crisp autumn morning, the rotors stirring, the wildflowers that still bloomed stubbornly despite the advancing season. Dad's expression as he gazed up at the lighthouse from his wheelchair contained a mixture of emotions too complex for simple categorization: recognition, relief, grief, and something like homecoming, all layered together in the subtle expressions that Alzheimer's had yet to claim. "It's exactly as I remembered," he said softly, as Uncle Henry and I helped navigate the newly constructed ramp toward the lighthouse keeper's quarters. "Katie's gardens are still here. The wildflower meadows Mom had carefully cultivated as part of her ecosystem research had been maintained by the caretaker Uncle Henry employed, their late-season blooms nodding in the salt-tinged breeze. Inside, the ground floor had been transformed into a comfortable living space with medical equipment discreetly integrated into the historic interior. A nurse named Maya, specially trained in dementia care, had been engaged to live in the adjacent guest quarters, providing round-the-clock support, supplemented by regular visits from medical specialists ferried from the mainland. The first evening, at the lighthouse as Dad sat in a specially designed chair positioned to overlook the water, he experienced one of his moments of startling clarity. This was the right decision, he said, watching the automated beam begin its rotation as dusk settled over the sound. Catherine always said we should end where we began. I sat beside him, noticing how the lighthouse's steady rhythm seemed to calm him in ways the urban condo environment never had. "You and Mom bought this place before I was born," I prompted, encouraging his intact long-term memories. Dad nodded, his gaze following the beam's path across the darkening water. "It was being decommissioned, set for commercial development. Katie was heartbroken. She'd been studying the tidal ecosystems here for years. The unique positioning creates marine microclimates unmatched anywhere else in the Sound." This was family history I knew well, but hearing him recall it with such precision gave me hope that the move to the lighthouse might indeed support his cognitive function in ways the neurologists had suggested environment could. "So you bought it to protect her research sites," I continued, gently guiding his reminiscence. "Not just that," Dad corrected, his expression animated with remembered purpose. "We established the trust to ensure long-term preservation." Katie insisted on the specialized provisions, the codicil that would activate under specific circumstances. "What kind of circumstances, Dad?" I asked, though I now understood the trust structure better than he likely did in his current state. His gaze, momentarily sharp with recollection, met mine. Exploitation, manipulation. Katie understood human vulnerabilities better than I did. She knew that wealth combined with declining capacity created opportunities for certain types of people. The precision of this assessment, delivered by a man whose diagnosis suggested he shouldn't be capable of such insight, was startling. "Like Vanessa," I said softly. Dad nodded, no confusion clouding his expression at the mention of his second wife. Exactly like Vanessa. Katie couldn't have predicted her specifically, but she understood the pattern. That's why she designed the trust to recognize those patterns even when I couldn't. These periods of clarity, while temporary, provided crucial opportunities for legal matters requiring Dad's direct participation. Margaret Chen arranged for a geriatric psychiatrist to be present during one such window, documenting Dad's capacity as he formally revoked all legal authorities granted to Vanessa during the period of suspected undue influence. The legal proceedings against Vanessa and Craig continued through the winter months, gradually exposing the full extent of their coordinated exploitation. Craig's investment scheme unraveled under forensic scrutiny, revealing a pattern of similar operations targeting vulnerable, wealthy individuals across several states. Vanessa's claim of being another victim rather than an accomplice grew increasingly unconvincing as evidence mounted of her active participation in selecting targets and facilitating financial access. Throughout this process, Dad remained at the lighthouse, where his condition stabilized in ways the neurologists found remarkable. While the Alzheimer's continued its inevitable progression, the consistent environment and proper medication allowed him longer periods of lucidity and emotional connection than had seemed possible during Vanessa's care. The property itself underwent transformation as we implemented Mom's long-held vision. The Lighthouse Trust now formally funded a marine research station focused on coastal ecosystem preservation, with an adjacent building converted to laboratory space, while Dad occupied the comfortably appointed keeper's quarters. My own career shifted to accommodate these changes. I arranged a research partnership between my university department and the newly established Catherine Wilson Marine Preservation Center, allowing me to split my time between Seattle and the island, continuing my work while remaining close to Dad. In spring, as wildflowers reclaimed the meadows surrounding the lighthouse, the final court decisions regarding Vanessa were delivered. Facing overwhelming evidence, she accepted a plea arrangement that included financial restitution, community service, and probation restrictions specifically barring her from working with vulnerable adults. Craig Donaldson, whose more extensive criminal enterprise involved multiple victims across several states, received a substantial prison sentence. The Lighthouse Trust, with its carefully crafted codicil, had proven more prescient than perhaps even Mom had anticipated. Its provisions not only protected Dad's assets from exploitation, but created the framework for his care in an environment that honored his true wishes rather than Vanessa's manufactured narrative of his needs. On a particularly clear evening, as we sat on the lighthouse gallery watching the sun sink toward the Olympic Mountains, Dad expressed a thought that captured the essence of our journey. "Your mother understood something fundamental about protection," he said, his gaze following the beam as it began its nightly rotation across the darkening water. "A lighthouse doesn't just warn of danger, it guides toward safety. Its purpose isn't primarily defensive, it's directional." I considered this distinction as the beacon swept across the waves below. How Mom's protective measures hadn't simply blocked Vanessa's exploitation, but had actively guided us toward the sanctuary that now housed Dad's final chapter. The trust wasn't merely a legal barrier, it was a pathway illuminated when we needed it most. The financial restitution ordered by the court eventually recovered most of the assets Craig had diverted through his investment scheme. The attorney who had facilitated Vanessa's healthcare proxy manipulation faced disciplinary action from the Bar Association. These legal consequences provided a measure of justice, but the true victory lay in the peaceful rhythm Dad had found at the lighthouse. Days spent watching the tidal ecosystems Mom had loved, evenings in the warm glow of the keeper's quarters as the beacon above maintained its steady pulse across the waters. Dad's decline continued, as the neurologist had warned it would, but at a pace tempered by proper care and an environment rich with meaningful connection. On good days, he would sit with my research team, offering occasional insights from his memories of Mom's work that sometimes startled the scientists with their precision and depth. On difficult days, when confusion clouded his recognition, the lighthouse's steady presence itself seemed to provide comfort, its reliability a counterpoint to his increasingly unreliable cognitive landscape. Ironically, the media attention surrounding Vanessa's case had an unexpected benefit. The Catherine Wilson Marine Preservation Center gained national recognition as both a research facility and a model for specialized dementia care in meaningful environments. Grants and private donations expanded our conservation work, extending Mom's scientific legacy far beyond what might have been possible otherwise. 6 months after our move to the lighthouse, during a rare Seattle visit for a department meeting, I encountered Craig Donaldson's former secretary at a coffee shop near the university. She hesitated before approaching my table, clearly uncertain of her reception. "I wanted you to know," she said, fidgeting with her cup, "that I provided some of the documentation to the prosecutors about how they selected targets, about the meetings between Craig and Vanessa before your father's diagnosis was even made public." Her revelation confirmed what we had suspected but couldn't prove, that Vanessa's relationship with Craig predated her marriage to Dad, suggesting a level of premeditated exploitation even more calculated than the courts had established. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Because they're not stopping. Craig's associate has taken over the operation while he's incarcerated. Vanessa is still connected to them, still identifying potential targets despite her probation restrictions. The authorities know, but proving it is difficult." She pushed a thumb drive across the table. "This might help if they target someone else. Account numbers, meeting dates, the pattern they follow. I thanked her, reflecting on how Mom's protective instincts continued to ripple outward, inspiring others to interrupt patterns of exploitation even beyond our family's immediate concerns. That evening, returning to the lighthouse on the last ferry, I watched its beam appear in the distance, a steady pulse against the darkening sky, guiding vessels safely through treacherous waters. The metaphor wasn't lost on me as I thought about the information I now carried, the potential to extend Mom's protective legacy to others who might face predators like Vanessa and Craig. The lighthouse had saved Dad from exploitation, preserved Mom's research legacy, and now offered a model for protecting others through awareness of these predatory patterns. Its beam, sweeping across the waters with unwavering consistency, embodied the principle at the heart of Mom's trust design. That true protection doesn't just erect barriers against harm, but illuminates paths toward something better. When visitors to the research center occasionally ask about the weathered photograph of Mom that holds the place of honor in the lighthouse keeper's study, her expression thoughtful as she examines a tide pool discovery, I explain that it represents more than memory. It symbolizes protection that transcends physical presence, wisdom that anticipates vulnerability, and love that builds safeguards extending beyond its own lifetime. The lighthouse continues its dual purpose, warning of dangerous shores while guiding towards safe harbor. Its trust, like its beam, remains active long after those who established it have passed, illuminating paths through dangerous waters for generations to come. As Dad's condition gradually progressed, the lighthouse remained his anchor to reality in increasingly confused days. Even when he could no longer remember my name consistently, he recognized the rhythmic flash of the beacon across his bedroom ceiling each night, the constant reminder that he was home, protected, surrounded by the legacy he and Mom had built, together. "Your mother was right," he said during one of his final moments of clarity as we sat watching orcas pass in the distance. "The best protection isn't a wall, it's a light that shows the way forward." That philosophy now guides the expanded mission of the Catherine Wilson Marine Preservation Center, which has incorporated educational programs about elder financial exploitation alongside its environmental research. The patterns Vanessa employed, isolation, medication manipulation, narrative control, are now taught to healthcare providers, financial advisors, and family members as warning signs of predatory behavior. While the court-ordered financial restitution helped recover most of the assets Craig had diverted, the true legacy of our struggle emerged in unexpected ways. The research center now hosts quarterly workshops for financial professionals on recognizing patterns of elder exploitation. Judges, attorneys, and medical professionals attend specialized trainings where Dad's case, carefully anonymized but thoroughly documented, serves as a powerful teaching tool. I often think about the confluence of circumstances that enabled our success against Vanessa's schemes. If Mom hadn't insisted on the specialized trust provisions, if Uncle Henry hadn't maintained his vigilance, if we hadn't documented every subtle manipulation over the years, the outcome would have been dramatically different. For every family that succeeds in protecting their vulnerable members, countless others lack the resources, knowledge, or foresight to recognize and counter such calculated exploitation. This reality inspired the center's newest initiative, Foundation providing legal advocacy for seniors facing potential financial exploitation. Funded by the recovered assets and supplemented by grants secured through the publicity surrounding Vanessa's case, the foundation pairs experienced elder law attorneys with families who might otherwise lack access to the protection legal expertise provides. 1 year after our move to the lighthouse, I received an unexpected package at the research center. Inside was a handwritten letter from Vanessa's first husband, a man we'd never met but whose existence Uncle Henry had discovered during his background investigation years earlier. "I read about your family's situation in the Seattle Times," he wrote. "What your stepmother did to your father mirrors what she attempted with my uncle 15 years ago. I wasn't successful in protecting him as you were with your father. The enclosed documents show the pattern was established long before she entered your lives. The accompanying files revealed a disturbing history we hadn't fully uncovered. Vanessa had refined her techniques through multiple relationships, each time learning from mistakes, improving her methods of manipulation, and leaving increasingly less evidence. The documents provided crucial missing links that helped prosecutors connect her to 3 additional cases of suspected financial exploitation, ultimately extending her probation and restitution requirements. When the district attorney asked why I wanted to pursue these additional charges despite having already secured our family's assets and Dad's well-being, I explained that the lighthouse's purpose extended beyond our personal safety. Its beam served all vessels navigating dangerous waters, not just those belonging to our family. Similarly, the protective measures Mom had designed weren't meant to benefit only us, but to illuminate broader patterns of exploitation that might otherwise remain hidden in darkness. Dad continued to decline gradually, but the lighthouse environment provided a peace that transformed his final chapter. Even as his memories became more fragmented, the sensory experiences remained. The rhythmic flash of the beacon, the salt-laden breeze, the calls of seabirds that had formed the soundtrack of Mom's research days. These elements seemed to ground him even when words and names escaped his grasp. 2 years after our move to the lighthouse, on a spring morning when the wildflowers Mom had cataloged were beginning their annual bloom, Dad passed peacefully, in his sleep. The windows of his room had been left open at his request, allowing the sounds of waves and wind to fill the space. The lighthouse beam had made its final sweep across his ceiling just as dawn broke, a fitting symmetry to a life that had been guided by Mom's foresight even years after her physical presence had ended. The memorial service was held at the lighthouse, with researchers, students, and maritime preservation advocates gathering alongside family and friends. Notable in their absence were Vanessa and Craig, whose exploitative chapter in our family history had been eclipsed by the positive legacy now blooming around us. The Catherine Wilson Marine Preservation Center had become a nationally recognized research facility, its dual mission of environmental conservation and elder protection advocacy attracting attention far beyond our regional scientific community. Uncle Henry, in his eulogy, captured the essence of what Dad and Mom had created together. "Richard built systems that connected people across distances," he said, looking out toward the waters they had both loved. "Catherine protected the natural systems that sustain all life." Together, they created not just a family, but a purpose that outlives them both: preservation of what matters most, whether it's coastal ecosystems or human dignity and vulnerability. As the guests departed on the last ferry, I remained at the lighthouse, climbing the spiral stairs to the beacon itself for the first time since Dad's decline had begun. The mechanism, now automated but preserved in its historic housing, continued its steady rotation, warning of dangerous shoals while simultaneously guiding vessels to safe harbor. I thought about the dual nature of the protection Mom had designed: into the trust, the defensive provisions that had blocked Vanessa's exploitation, and the directional elements that had guided us toward creating something meaningful from our family crisis. The lighthouse hadn't just saved Dad's assets. It had illuminated a path toward extending that protection to others facing similar threats. In the years since, the center has expanded its research into both marine ecosystems and elder exploitation patterns. The parallels between these seemingly different fields have proven surprisingly rich. Both involve complex, interconnected systems where subtle disturbances can create cascading effects. Both require vigilant monitoring and intervention to maintain balance. Both benefit from transparency and illumination of otherwise hidden dynamics. The legal precedents established through Dad's case have helped strengthen protections for other vulnerable adults. The specific provisions of Mom's trust codicil have been adapted into model language now recommended by elder law specialists across the country. The documentation methods Uncle Henry taught me have been developed into protocols for families concerned about potential exploitation. Vanessa herself eventually violated her probation by attempting to establish a similar exploitative relationship with a recently widowed technology executive, a violation documented using the evidence. Collection techniques our case had helped standardize. The resulting revocation of her probation and subsequent incarceration provided a measure of justice, but more importantly, prevented her from harming others through the same calculated tactics. The lighthouse keeper's quarters, where Dad spent his final years, have been preserved as a living museum of both marine research history and elder protection advocacy. The room where Mom once cataloged tidal specimens and Dad later watched the beam sweep across his ceiling now serves as a teaching space where legal and medical professionals learn to recognize the subtle patterns of exploitation that might otherwise go undetected. 5 years after Dad's passing, I stood on the lighthouse gallery watching a new generation of marine biology students collecting samples from the tidal pools below, the same pools Mom had studied decades earlier. Their research now extended hers, tracking changes in the microcosm ecosystems as indicators of larger oceanic shifts. The preservation of this research site, secured through Mom's foresight and Dad's implementation of the trust, had created scientific continuity that transcended individual careers or lifespans. A photograph of Mom and Dad now hangs in the lighthouse entrance, she in her research gear examining a tide pool, he standing nearby with pride evident in his expression. Visitors often comment on the palpable connection between them captured in the image. What they don't see is the invisible connection that extended years beyond Mom's physical presence. The protective framework she designed that ultimately guided Dad safely through treacherous waters neither of them could have navigated. Alone, the lighthouse beam continues its steady rotation night after night, year after year, a testament to Mom's understanding that true protection requires not just defensive barriers, but illumination that extends far beyond our immediate horizons, guiding others safely home even in the darkest waters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.